Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash caught a shiny Gardevoir and a shiny Lopunny who competed to be his main wife. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Guardian of the Fading Light. The holoscreen flickered, casting the familiar, wizened face of Professor Oak in shifting shades of blue across the quiet study. The room was Ash Ketchum's, a space that spoke more of function than comfort. Polished trophies from a dozen leagues stood silent on a mantelpiece, their gold and silver glinting like captured stars. Maps of regions known and unknown were tacked to the walls, crisscrossed with faded ink lines tracing journeys long since completed. It was the den of a man who had seen the world and then some, yet the only object that seemed truly lived in was the worn leather armchair he currently occupied. The reports are consistent, Ash, Oak said, his voice, usually so full of avuncular warmth, now tight with a concern that transcended the digital connection. From the Seafoam Islands in Kanto to the outer edges of the Galar region. We're calling them Aura Dead Zones. Ash leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He was 22, but the look in his eyes held a stillness that belonged to someone much older. The restless energy of his youth had not vanished but had been forged into a focused, unshakable calm. He had faced down gods, stared into the abyss of alternate dimensions, and calmed the rampaging spirits of legends. He had earned the title of world monarch not just with power, but with the quiet authority that came from understanding the fundamental connections that held the world together. And he could feel those connections fraying. Pikachu, perched on the arm of the chair, mirrored his trainer's gravity. His ears were flat against his head, his own sensitive reserves of energy picking up on the disquiet that rippled through the world's ether. "Tell me what you're seeing, Professor," Ash said. His voice was a low baritone, steady as a rock. "It's a void," Oak struggled, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "The natural life force of the area simply ceases to be. It's not drained or corrupted in the way Team Rocket or other groups have attempted. It's erased. Wild Pokémon within these zones become disoriented, their instincts twisted. They grow aggressive, not out of malice, but out of sheer terror. Outside the zones, everything is fine. But the perimeters are expanding." A new image appeared on the screen, a global map dotted with angry red blotches. One, hovering over a remote corner of the Hoenn region, was significantly larger and pulsed with a malevolent intensity. "This one appeared 3 days ago," Oak pointed a virtual finger at it. "It's growing faster than any of the others. It's centered on the Whisperwood, north of Fortree City. An ancient place, steeped in folklore. Most locals avoid it already." Ash's gaze locked onto the pulsing red. He could almost feel it from here, a cold patch in the vibrant tapestry of the world. It was the feeling of a thread being pulled, threatening to unravel the whole. He didn't need to consult a council or wait for a consensus. Some things were simply his responsibility. "I'll go," he said, the decision as simple and final as drawing a breath. "Pikachu and I will leave within the hour." Oak nodded, a wave of relief washing over his features. "I thought you might. Be careful, Ash. We've sent probes, but we lose contact the moment they cross the boundary. We don't know what's at the center of this." "That's what we'll find out," Ash replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. A familiar fire, banked low for years, began to stir. It wasn't the thrill of a gym battle or the roar of a stadium. It was the cold, hard resolve of a protector facing a nameless threat. He stood, and Pikachu leaped from the armrest to his usual place on his shoulder, a small, determined weight that had grounded him for over a decade. "Pikachu, let's get ready," Ash said, stroking the yellow fur. "Pika." The response was sharp, a bolt of lightning-given voice. The monarch and his partner were moving. The world had a problem, and they were going to fix it. The flight to Hoenn was on a private jet provided by the Pokémon League, a necessity of his station that Ash still found vaguely uncomfortable. He spent the journey not reviewing data or planning strategies, but simply staring out the window at the world below. He watched oceans glitter and coastlines unfurl, feeling the vast, interconnected web of life that spanned the globe. It was a tangible thing to him, a current he could feel in his own blood and bones, a power he had learned to touch and, in small ways, guide. This new threat felt like an absolute negation of that current. An anti-life. They landed at a small, private airstrip near Rustboro City, where a League Ranger was waiting with a rugged, all-terrain vehicle. The Ranger, a young woman with a determined jaw and sun-bleached hair, saluted him crisply. "Monarch Ketchum. I'm Ranger Isla. We've cordoned off the access roads to the Whisperwood. The local Pokemon are in a panic. We had a herd of Tauros stampede through a farming community yesterday. They weren't charging, they were fleeing. Any trainers go in?" Ash asked, slinging his worn backpack over his shoulder. A few hot-headed ones tried. "We stopped most of them," she said, her expression grim. "One got through our perimeter. A youngster with a Swampert. His Swampert dragged him back out an hour later. The kid was empty. Just staring. Hasn't said a word since. The Pokemon Center said there's nothing physically wrong with him, but his spark is gone." Ash's jaw tightened. This was worse than he thought. It wasn't just killing. It was unmaking. "Thank you, Ranger. I'll take it from here on foot," he said, nodding towards the tree line in the distance. "Keep the perimeter tight. No one else goes in. No matter what they hear." Isla hesitated, then nodded. "Understood, sir. Good luck." Ash gave her a small, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and then he and Pikachu turned towards the forest. The edge of the Whisperwood was not a gradual transition. It was a wall. One moment, they were in a sun-dappled Hoenn field, the air alive with the buzz of beautifly and the scent of wildflowers. The next, they crossed an invisible line, and the world went silent. The birdsong ceased. The hum of insects died. The air grew cold and thin, carrying a faint, metallic scent like ozone and dust. The trees within were ancient and massive, but their leaves were a sickly, uniform gray, brittle and lifeless. The vibrant green moss that should have coated their trunks was black and flaked away like ash. Pikachu whispered, his fur standing on end. He pressed closer to Ash's neck, a small furnace of warmth against the encroaching chill. "I feel it too, buddy," Ash murmured. He closed his eyes, extending his senses. Usually, a forest was a symphony of aura, the deep, slow pulse of the trees, the quick, bright sparks of hidden Pokemon, the gentle thrum of the earth itself. Here, there was only a profound and terrifying silence. It was like staring into a soundproof room, a vacuum where life used to be. The dead zone was aptly named. They moved forward, their footsteps unnaturally loud on the carpet of dead leaves. The path was clear, not from maintenance, but because nothing grew here anymore. No underbrush, no ferns, no fungi. Just dirt and decay. After 10 minutes of walking through the oppressive stillness, they saw the first sign of corrupted life. A Linoon, its fur matted and its eyes wide with a frantic, unseeing light, was running in tight, desperate circles. It wasn't charging or attacking. It was simply, glitching. Its form flickered at the edges, its stripes seeming to lag a half-second behind its body, like a poor-quality video stream. Ash held up a hand, and Pikachu tensed, cheeks sparking. "Easy, Pikachu. It's lost." Ash took a slow step forward. Linoon, the Pokemon shrieked, a sound of pure static, and charged. It wasn't a tackle or a headbutt. It just ran at him, its body leaving faint, smoky trails of nothingness in its wake. There was no strategy, only panic. "Pikachu, quick attack. Don't hurt it, just get it off its feet." Pikachu became a blur of yellow. He zipped past the Linoon, not striking it, but clipping its legs with a precise, non-damaging burst of speed. The disoriented Pokémon tumbled head over tail, landing in a heap. It didn't try to get up. It just lay there, trembling, the flickering of its form slowly subsiding now that its frantic energy was spent. Ash knelt, pulling a small, specially formulated sedative patch from his belt pouch and gently applying it to the Linoon's neck. The creature's frantic breathing evened out, and it fell into a deep, blessedly still sleep. One down, Ash muttered, standing up. There are going to be more. He was right. As they ventured deeper, the instances became more frequent and more disturbing. A pair of Zigzagoon that seemed to be phasing in and out of existence. A Mytiana whose shadow seemed to be actively consuming its hind legs, the limbs fading into a murky, pixelated void. Ash and Pikachu moved with practiced efficiency, incapacitating them without causing serious injury. It wasn't a battle, it was a rescue mission under the worst possible conditions. The air grew heavier, colder. A low, continuous hum began to vibrate through the soles of Ash's boots. It was a sound that didn't seem to enter through the ears but was felt deep in the bones, a resonant frequency of absolute zero. He knew they were getting close to the center. They broke through a final, dense wall of dying trees into a large, circular clearing. And Ash's breath caught in his throat. In the center of the clearing stood the ruins of a stone shrine. It was ancient, its carvings worn smooth by millennia of wind and rain. A soft, ethereal light, the last bastion of life in this dying wood, pulsated weakly from a central altar stone. But that wasn't what held his attention. Standing before the altar was a figure of impossible grace. It was a Gardevoir, but unlike any he had ever seen. Its body was a pristine, spectral white, and its flowing, gown-like form seemed to shimmer with an inner luminescence. The horn-like protrusions on its chest were not the usual red but a deep, vibrant cerulean that matched the stunning color of its hair. A shiny Gardevoir. And she was fighting. She stood as a lone beacon against a tide of darkness. A horde of corrupted Pokémon swarmed the clearing, their forms twisted into nightmarish parodies. A Breloom's mushroom cap spewed spores of gray static that ate away at the very air. A Shiftry's fan-like hands were blurred into whirling vortexes of entropy. A Slaking, its body flickering violently, radiated an aura of crushing lethargy that made the very ground seem to sink. The Gardevoir moved like a dancer in a hurricane. A shimmering blue barrier of psychic energy deflected the worst of the attacks. She didn't launch massive, explosive blasts. Her power was precise, elegant, and devastating. She extended a hand, and a dozen crescent-shaped blades of pure psychic energy, moonblasts, Ash realized, but controlled with a mastery he'd never witnessed, shot out, not striking the Pokémon, but slicing through the air around them, severing invisible tethers of corruption. For every Pokémon she freed, 2 more would succumb to the suffocating influence of the dead zone and join the assault. She was exhausted, her movements a fraction slower than they should have been, her psychic shield wavering with each impact. She was losing. Ash didn't need to be asked. He didn't need a reason. He saw a battle to be fought, a person to be saved, and a light to be protected. Pikachu, you see that Breloom? The spores are accelerating the decay. Take it out. Iron Tail to scatter the spores, then Thunderbolt. Ash's voice cut through the humming dread, sharp and commanding. Pikachu. With a cry that was both a challenge and a promise, Pikachu launched himself from Ash's shoulder. He hit the ground and became a golden comet. The Breloom turned, its featureless face registering a new threat. It released a thick cloud of gray, crackling spores. Ash felt a wave of dizziness as they spread, the world seeming to desaturate around him. But Pikachu was faster. He leaped, spinning in mid-air, his tail glowing with the metallic sheen of Iron Tail. He didn't aim for the Breloom, but for the cloud itself. The hardened tail ripped through the spores, the raw physical energy dispersing the entropic cloud with a sharp crack. Before the Breloom could react, Pikachu landed, his body already gathering the storm. Thunderbolt. Ash roared. A colossal bolt of golden lightning, born of a bond 20 years in the making, slammed into the Brelum. The corrupted Pokémon was lifted from its feet, convulsing not just from the electricity, but from the raw, life-affirming energy that was anathema to the void clinging to it. It crashed to the ground, the static fading from its form, unconscious but stable. The Gardevoir flinched in surprise at the sudden, powerful intervention. Her head turned, and for a moment, her piercing cerulean eyes met Ash's. He saw shock, exhaustion, and a flicker of something he hadn't expected, hope. A telepathic voice, clear and resonant as a silver bell yet strained with fatigue, echoed in his mind. Who are you? Ash didn't have time to answer. The Mytiana whose shadow was eating it and a frenzied Agron, its steel armor pocked with holes of shimmering nothingness, turned their attention on the newcomer. You handle the small ones. I'll take the big guys. Ash yelled to the Gardevoir, already moving. He wasn't a trainer standing on the sidelines anymore. The monarch fought with his Pokémon. He slid to a halt in front of the charging Agron, his eyes locked on the behemoth. He dropped into a low stance, his own aura flaring to life, a brilliant, defiant blue that pushed back against the oppressive gray of the dead zone. He wasn't using a move, he was using himself as a shield, a focus point. Agron. I'm your opponent, he shouted, his voice infused with his own energy. The Agron, driven by mindless rage, swung a colossal arm, aiming to crush him. Ash didn't flinch. At the last possible second, he pivoted, the blow missing him by a hair's breadth and slamming into the ground, cracking the dead earth. He slapped the Agron's leg as it passed, a jolt of his own stabilizing aura flowing into the corrupted metal. It wasn't enough to heal it, but it was enough to make it hesitate. Meanwhile, the shadow-eaten Mytiana lunged for him. Before its fangs could connect, a pinkish bolt of energy, a dazzling gleam from the Gardevoir, struck it from the side, sending it tumbling. It is not wise to engage them directly. Their touch spreads the decay. Her voice was a sharp warning in his head. No choice. Need to draw their fire. Pikachu, Volt Tackle on the Agron, now. Ash projected the thought back, a raw, instinctual command. Pikachu, already anticipating the order, became a living thunderbolt. Cloaked in a crackling shroud of golden electricity, he slammed into the Agron's chest. The impact was immense, the sound of a thunderclap and a car crash combined. The Agron staggered back, roaring in pain and confusion, its corrupted form flickering wildly under the assault of pure energy. The Gardevoir seized the opening. With a graceful sweep of her arms, she gathered the faint light from the altar stone, weaving it with her own psychic power. She wasn't attacking. She was creating. A massive, complex psychic lattice spread out from her, a net of shimmering blue light. It wasn't a cage, but a circuit. Now. Channel your energy into the pattern. She commanded, her voice resonating with power. Ash understood instantly. This wasn't about brute force. It was about restoration. He closed his eyes, plunging his hands into his own wellspring of aura. He felt the lattice she had created, a beacon of order in the chaos. He pushed, feeding his own vibrant, blue energy into the network. At the same time, Pikachu, still crackling from the Volt Tackle, unleashed a controlled discharge, feeding his electric life force into the psychic grid. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The blue lattice flared, igniting like a constellation. It swept across the clearing, passing through each of the corrupted Pokémon. It wasn't a blast that hurt them, but a wave of harmonic resonance that shattered the discordant frequency of the void. The static, the flickering, the shadows, all were washed away in a tide of pure, ordered energy. One by one, the rampaging Pokémon collapsed, their forms solid and whole once more, their breathing deep and even. They were healed, or at least, the influence was purged. The oppressive hum that had vibrated through the ground faded, replaced by a fragile, tentative silence. The clearing was still. The battle was over. Pikachu scampered back to Ash, panting but triumphant. Ash straightened up, his own energy reserves feeling dangerously low. His gaze went immediately to the Gardevoir. The moment the last Pokémon fell, her strength gave out. The ethereal light around her flickered and died. She swayed on her feet, her legs buckling. Ash moved without thinking, crossing the clearing in a few quick strides and catching her before she could hit the ground. She was surprisingly light, yet felt solid and real in his arms. Her head rested against his chest, her breathing shallow. He could feel the profound exhaustion rolling off her in waves. Her skin was cool to the touch. "Thank you," the voice in his head was a bare whisper now, fragile as glass. "Rest. You've earned it," Ash said softly. He gently lowered her to a sitting position, propping her against the base of the altar stone. He unclipped a small pouch from his belt and pulled out a citrus berry and a small canteen of water. He held the berry out to her. She looked at the berry, then up at him. Her cerulean eyes, no longer clouded by the strain of battle, were impossibly deep. She seemed to be looking not at his face, but through him, at the very core of his being. He felt a gentle, psychic touch brush against his mind, not intrusive, but like a soft hand checking for fever. He felt her sense his history, the triumphs, the losses, the unbreakable bonds with his Pokémon, the sheer, stubborn weight of his will to protect. She slowly reached out a slender, three-fingered hand and took the berry. She ate it, and a faint blush of color returned to her cheeks. A little of her strength returned. "Your aura, it shines so brightly," she whispered in his mind. "Like a newborn star. I have not felt such a light in a very long time. My name is Ash Ketchum. This is my partner, Pikachu." Ash introduced himself, resting a hand on Pikachu's head. "Pika Pi," Pikachu greeted her, nodding respectfully. "I am Saraphina," she replied, her mental voice growing a little stronger. "I am the guardian of this place. Or, what is left of it." She gestured a weak hand towards the altar. "This shrine is a seal. One of many across the world, placed in ancient times. They are anchors, meant to reinforce the fabric of existence against the unraveling. The nothingness. The dead zone," Ash realized. "It's not just erasing life. It's trying to break the seal." "Yes," Seraphina confirmed. "The entity I fight has no name. It is a formless, patient hunger from beyond the stars. For centuries, my ancestors and I have held it back, a silent vigil. But it has grown stronger. Bolder. I am the last of my line. The seal is failing. What you fought were not monsters, but victims. Pokémon whose own life force was being turned inside out to batter against the walls of their reality." A profound loneliness emanated from her, a sorrow that felt ancient and deep. She had been fighting this battle alone, for who knew how long, watching her home crumble around her. Ash looked at the unconscious Pokémon scattered around the clearing. He looked at the crumbling shrine. He looked at this powerful, beautiful, and utterly solitary being who had been fighting a war no one else even knew existed. His path was suddenly, luminously clear. The monarch's duty wasn't just to win leagues or defend against visible threats. It was to protect the world's connections, even the ones hidden in the shadows. "You're not alone anymore, Seraphina," he said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. He knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze directly. "Your fight is my fight now. The world needs its anchors. And its guardians need allies. Stand with me. Not as a Pokémon I've captured, but as a partner. Let us face this unraveling together." Seraphina stared at him, her cerulean eyes wide. She saw no pride in him, no desire for a powerful new Pokémon to add to his roster. She saw an offer between equals. A shared burden. A bond, freely offered. She saw the unwavering truth in the blindingly bright star of his soul. A single, shimmering tear, like a drop of liquid moonlight, traced a path down her white cheek. She had been a guardian, a concept, a duty. He was the first person in a lifetime to see her. She slowly, gracefully, rose to her feet. She was taller than him, and she stood before him with a renewed dignity, the exhaustion replaced by a dawning, fierce resolve. The weak light from the altar seemed to brighten, drawn to the renewed strength of its guardian and the new, powerful light beside her. "I accept, Ash Ketchum," she said, her voice now ringing with its full, bell-like clarity in his mind, a solemn vow that echoed in the very fiber of his being. She took a step closer, her presence a mix of ancient grace and immense, newly pledged power. "I will be your shield and your counsel. The one closest to your heart." The declaration hung in the air, absolute and profound. It wasn't a question, a flirtation, or a hope. It was a statement of destiny, delivered with the certainty of a psychic who had just seen the future lock into place. Ash, for the first time in a very long time, was genuinely taken aback, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. Before he could even begin to process the depth of that statement, a new day's sun broke over the dead grey canopy of the Whisperwood, its golden rays cutting through the gloom and illuminating the three figures in the clearing, the monarch, his oldest friend, and his new, self-declared First Lady. A new and infinitely more complicated journey had just begun. Chapter 2, The Unbroken Queen of the Wastes. The private transport jet touched down on the tarmac of the Orberg City League facility with a gentle bump. For the past 3 days, this had been their forward operating base. The Whisperwood incident had sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of the global Pokémon League, and Ash, as the monarch, was now at the spear tip of the response. The room they had given him was a sterile, functional suite, all polished chrome and grey furniture, but it was already layered with the comfortable chaos of his presence. His pack was slung over a chair, Pikachu's favorite ketchup bottle sat on a side table, and a detailed map of Sinnoh was spread across the central conference table, covered in Ash's decisive scrawl. Saraphina was a silent, graceful presence in the room. She did not sit, but hovered a hair's breadth above the floor near the window, gazing out at the silhouette of Mount Coronet in the distance. She had not spoken a word with her mouth since joining him, he wasn't even sure if she could, but her telepathic voice was a near constant, soothing hum in the back of his mind. It was a strange and profound intimacy, having someone with direct access to his thoughts, yet she was never intrusive. She was a living filter, sensing his anxieties and offering quiet, psychic reassurances, like a cool hand on a fevered brow. "The energy patterns here are tangled," she commented, her mental voice like the chime of a distant bell. "Mount Coronet acts as a massive conductor for the world's aura. It feels strained, like a string pulled too taut." Ash looked up from the report he was reading. "The dead zones haven't appeared here yet, but the background radiation of this null is spreading. That's what's causing the strain." Pikachu, perched on the back of Ash's chair, nodded in agreement. He'd been wary of Saraphina at first, his protective instincts on high alert. But he'd watched her fight, felt her calm, and saw the profound respect she showed Ash. Now, he treated her like a visiting dignitary, observant and respectful, but still reserving final judgment. "It is more than that," Saraphina corrected gently, turning her head to look at him. Her cerulean eyes seemed to see the very air between them. "The nothingness we fought in my forest was a silent void, a simple erasure. This strain, it feels different. Sharper. More aggressive. It has a voice." Before Ash could ask what she meant, the door to the suite chimed. A stern-faced woman in the uniform of a Galar League officer, seconded to the monarch's staff, entered and saluted. "Sir. We have a priority alert. It's bad." She tapped a data pad, and the main holoscreen in the room lit up, overriding the Sinnoh map. It showed a live satellite feed of a desolate, volcanic plateau several hundred miles north, near Stark Mountain. The area was a hellscape of jagged obsidian and steaming fissures, a place known as the Ashen caldera. And at its center was a rapidly expanding blotch of angry, swirling red data. A new dead zone. "This one appeared less than an hour ago," the officer reported, her voice tight. "The growth rate is exponential. But it's the secondary reports that are the problem. The screen split, showing chaotic footage from a panicked ranger drone. It depicted a scene of absolute carnage. Pokémon were fighting with a rabid intensity Ash hadn't seen since the days of the Shadow Pokémon crisis. An Agron was tearing into a golem, not for territory, but with a mindless, self-destructive fury. A flock of Staraptor were diving at each other in mid-air, their talons seeking not prey, but the throats of their own kind. The null influence here isn't just disorienting them, the officer said, her face pale. It's amplifying their aggression to an insane degree. It's turning the entire ecosystem into a gladiatorial bloodbath. The drone recorded a dozen species wiping each other out before it was destroyed. Ash's face was grim. This was a horrifying escalation. What's at the center? We don't know. The drone was taken out by a blur. One moment it was there, the next it was scrap metal. But thermal imaging shows a pocket of calm right in the eye of the storm. A large community of smaller, weaker Pokémon, completely untouched by the frenzy. Ash and Saraphina exchanged a look. A pocket of order in the midst of induced chaos. That wasn't a natural phenomenon. That was a sign of a will. I feel it now, Seraphina's voice was low and tense in his mind. The voice. It is not the formless hunger. It is a scream of pure, unbroken rage. A will that refuses to bend. A queen on a throne of ash. Get me a chopper, Ash commanded, already grabbing his backpack. Pikachu, Seraphina. We're going in. The flight was tense. The wind currents around the caldera were violent and unpredictable, forcing the pilot to set them down on a ridge miles from the dead zone's epicenter. The moment they stepped out of the helicopter, the air hit them like a physical blow. It was hot, thick with sulfur and the coppery tang of blood. The ground crunched under Ash's boots, a mixture of volcanic scree and bone fragments. Pikachu muttered, his nose twitching in disgust. The ambient rage was a palpable force. Ash could feel it pressing in, a psychic irritant that made his teeth ache and his muscles clench. It was a constant, maddening whisper of fight, kill, survive. Allow me, Seraphina said. She stepped forward, her white form a stark contrast to the black rock and red glare of the fissures. She raised her hands, and a translucent dome of shimmering cerulean energy expanded from her, enveloping the three of them. The maddening psychic pressure didn't vanish, but it was muted, pushed back beyond the perimeter of her shield. The air inside the bubble felt clean and still. It was a small, mobile sanctuary in a world gone mad. Ash gave her a grateful nod. Thanks, Seraphina. I don't know how long we could have stayed focused in that. It is my duty to shield your heart and your mind, she replied simply, the declaration sending another strange ripple through him. They moved forward, descending from the ridge into the caldera proper. The scene was even more brutal up close. They passed the carcass of a Rhyperior, its formidable armor plating cracked and shattered. Its opponent, a massive Macamp, lay a few yards away, its four arms broken at unnatural angles. Neither had survived. They hadn't been corrupted into nothingness like the Pokémon in Whisperwood, they had been driven to annihilate each other. As they walked, the sounds of battle became clearer, not the clash of a few powerful combatants, but the constant, brutal background noise of a warzone. Yet, as they got closer to the center, a strange pattern emerged. The fighting was all on the periphery. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. They rounded a massive outcrop of obsidian and stopped dead. Before them was a large, flat basin, sheltered from the wind. And it was full of Pokémon. Dozens of them. Bidoof, Shinx, Starly, Kricketot, the small, the weak, the prey. They were huddled together in tight, terrified groups, but they were unharmed. A makeshift barrier of broken rock and scorched earth had been erected around their sanctuary. They were prisoners, but they were safe. Standing guard at the edge of this sanctuary was a lone Skarmory, its steel wings battered and dented. It watched the chaotic battles raging in the distance with a vigilant, weary eye. As Ash and his companions approached, the Skarmory let out a sharp, warning cry. Instantly, a ripple of fear went through the huddled Pokémon. Suddenly, a blur of motion exploded from the heart of the sanctuary. It was too fast to track, a streak of cream and brown that moved with impossible speed. It shot past the Skarmory, past the barrier, and into the chaotic battlefield beyond. A deranged, rampaging Camerupt, its volcanic hump spewing magma laced with the same grey static Ash had seen before, was charging towards the sanctuary. Before Ash could even react, the blur intercepted it. There was a sickening crack that echoed through the caldera. The blur resolved itself for a split second. A leg, impossibly long and powerful, slammed into the side of the Camerupt's head. The massive volcano Pokémon was lifted clean off its feet and sent crashing onto its side, its charge broken, its frenzy silenced in a single, devastating blow. The attacker landed with a cat-like grace, its back to them. Ash finally got a clear look. It was a Lopunny. But like Saraphina, it was unlike any he had ever encountered. Its main coat was a soft, creamy white, while the fluffy wool on its ears and limbs was a rich, dark chocolate brown. A shiny Lopunny. It was tall, lean, and radiated an aura not of grace, but of pure, condensed power. Every line of its body was coiled muscle, a weapon honed to perfection. It turned its head, and its eyes met Ash's. They were not the soft, gentle eyes of a typical Lopunny. They were the color of burning embers, intelligent, fierce, and utterly uncompromising. This wasn't a pet. This was a warrior. A queen. She took in their group in a single, sweeping glance: Ash, the human with the impossibly bright aura, Pikachu, a concentration of electric power on his shoulder, and Saraphina, a ghostly, elegant presence that felt alien and wrong in this place of rock and fire. The Lopunny's eyes narrowed. She saw intruders. A potential threat to her territory and her flock. Without a sound, without a warning, she attacked. She pushed off the ground, closing the 50-yard distance between them in the space of a heartbeat. She was a brown and cream missile aimed directly at Ash. Ash, move. Seraphina's warning was sharp, and a wall of psychic force erupted in front of him. The Lopunny didn't even slow down. She twisted in midair, her powerful legs striking the psychic shield. It wasn't a matter of psychic power versus physical strength. Her attack was too primal, too grounded in raw, kinetic force. The shield didn't break, it shattered like brittle glass, the psychic feedback causing Seraphina to stumble back, a hand flying to her head in pain. Her will, it is like a rock. My power cannot find purchase. Seraphina gasped in his mind. The Lopunny was still coming. Pikachu's cheeks erupted in sparks. Pikachu. No, Pikachu. Stay put. Ash commanded, his voice steel. He pushed off the balls of his feet, his body moving with a fluid grace born of years of dodging attacks far larger than this. The Lopunny's first attack was a high jump kick, a classic, powerful knee strike aimed at his chest. Ash didn't back away. He slid forward and to the side, the wind from the kick roaring past his ear. He was inside her guard now. He saw her eyes widen for a fraction of a second in surprise. She was expecting him to run or cower. He had done neither. She was impossibly fast, recovering in an instant. She spun, a low sweep kick aimed at his legs. Ash leaped, his movements unnaturally light, a faint blue shimmer of aura flaring around his boots. He had spent years training with Pokémon like Greninja and Infernape, their acrobatic, high-speed styles were burned into his muscle memory. He landed silently and fell into a low, ready stance. The Lopunny stood opposite him, her initial blitz attack thwarted. She wasn't attacking wildly. This was a calculated test. A probe. And he had just passed the first part. She didn't give him time to breathe. She came at him again, This time a flurry of kicks and punches, a whirlwind of cream-colored fur and hard-hitting limbs. It wasn't a formal fighting style, it was pure, instinctive brawling, refined by 1,000 life-or-death battles. Ash became a blur of motion himself. He didn't try to counterattack. His hands moved in a series of blocks and parries, redirecting her blows. He slapped a kick aimed at his head, sending her leg wide. He twisted his torso to let a punch slide off his shoulder. It was a dance of incredible danger, a conversation being held through violence. "I am the alpha here," her movements screamed. "This is my territory." "I see your strength," his defense replied. "And I am not intimidated by it." She broke off the attack, leaping back and landing lightly on her feet. A low growl rumbled in her chest. She was frustrated, annoyed, and intrigued. She had fought and broken rampaging Steelix and packs of Tyranitar. This human, he was different. He fought like a Pokémon. She decided to end it. She crouched low, gathering power in her legs, her muscles bunching. Ash's eyes widened. He knew that stance. It was the precursor to a maximum power attack. The Lopunny exploded forward, her fist cocked back. It wasn't a simple punch. It was cloaked in a faint, shimmering aura of its own. A focus punch. Ash knew he couldn't dodge it, not at this range. He didn't try. Instead, he stood his ground, took a deep breath, and focused his own aura. A sheath of brilliant blue energy enveloped his forearms as he brought them up in an X block. The impact was like a bomb going off. A shockwave of dust and displaced air erupted from the point of contact. The ground beneath Ash's feet cracked. His arms screamed in protest, a jolt of raw power traveling up to his shoulders. But he held. His feet slid back a foot, carving 2 deep grooves in the volcanic rock, but he did not break. He had met the full force of her attack and absorbed it. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The Lopunny's fist was pressed against his crossed arms. Her ember-like eyes were wide with disbelief. She could feel the immense, unyielding energy of his aura pushing back against her. It felt like a mountain. Like the earth itself. "Enough," Ash said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute command. "We're not here to fight you." He pushed, and the Lopunny, caught off balance by his sheer stability, was forced to hop back a step. Before she could decide on her next move, a bellowing roar echoed through the caldera, shaking the very foundations of the rock. A new challenger had arrived. It was a monstrous Tyranitar, larger than any Ash had ever seen. Its craggy, rock-like hide was crawling with the grey static of the null, and its eyes burned with a mindless, destructive light. A sandstream ability kicked up immediately, but this was no normal sandstorm, it was a swirling vortex of razor-sharp obsidian shards and entropic energy that tore at the very air. The Lopunny spun around, her attention immediately shifting to the greater threat. This was the alpha of a rival pack from the caldera's edge, driven mad by the null. The Tyranitar ignored the other Pokémon. Its malevolent gaze was locked on the sanctuary of weaklings the Lopunny New York protected. "Ash, its mind is gone. There is nothing left but rage and the void." Saraphina projected, her psychic shield straining against the obsidian storm. The Lopunny didn't hesitate. She charged the Tyranitar, a lone warrior against a living mountain. She was brave, but it was suicide. The Tyranitar swiped a clawed hand, and she was forced to leap back, unable to get close. "This isn't your fight alone." Ash yelled over the roar of the storm. He looked at the Lopunny, then back at the Tyranitar. A plan bloomed in his mind, sharp and clear. He looked at the Lopunny, pointing at the Tyranitar. "Its armor is too thick. But you're fast enough to break it. Aim for the chest plate, where it's thinnest. Go." The Lopunny looked at him, then at the Tyranitar, then back at him. It was a crazy plan. A human was giving her, the unbroken queen of this wasteland, tactical orders. But she had felt his strength. She had seen the certainty in his eyes. For some reason she couldn't explain, she trusted him. With a sharp nod, she was gone, a streak of motion weaving through the obsidian storm. Saraphina, can you create an opening? Just a split second. Ash shouted. I can try. A pulse of psychic energy, a concentrated blade of telekinesis, shot from Saraphina and struck the Tyranider's head. It wasn't enough to harm it, but it was enough to make it flinch, its head recoiling for a bare instant. That was all the Lopunny needed. She vaulted off a nearby rock, her leg extended in a devastating axe kick. She slammed her heel down directly onto the Tyranider's chest plate. There was a sound like cracking granite, and spiderweb fractures appeared on the creature's rocky hide. Pikachu, now. Aim for the cracks. Full power, Thunderbolt. Pikachu. A bolt of lightning, thicker than Ash's arm and brighter than the sun, lanced through the swirling storm and struck the Tyranider square in its fractured chest. The monster roared, not in pain, but in outrage. The electricity coursed over its rock-type body, causing it to shudder, but it wasn't enough. It's too strong. Ash muttered, the obsidian shards in the storm starting to cut at his clothes. The Lopunny landed and immediately charged again, hammering the cracked chest plate with a furious barrage of kicks, each one widening the fractures, her body a testament to relentless, focused power. She was creating a bigger target. Ash saw it. Again, Pikachu. But this time, with me. He placed a hand on Pikachu's head, closing his eyes. His own aura surged, not blue and defensive, but golden and electric, mingling with Pikachu's. He wasn't just giving an order, he was lending his own energy to the attack, shaping it, focusing it. Let's show them what a real bond looks like. Volt Crash. It was a move born of their unique connection, a fusion of Volt Tackle's power and Ash's aura control. Pikachu's body became a meteor of pure, concentrated electricity, his form blurring as Ash's aura supercharged the attack. He didn't just hit the Tyranider. He punctured it. The Volt Crash slammed into the cracked chest plate, and this time, there was no resistance. Pikachu blasted straight through the corrupted armor and into the core of the null-infested energy within. The Tyranider's roar was cut short, replaced by a high-pitched scream of static. Its body convulsed, the grey void energy erupting from the wound in Pikachu's wake. For a moment, the creature seemed to collapse in on itself, before it fell forward with a ground-shaking thud that silenced the entire caldera. The obsidian storm died instantly, the air becoming still and clear. Pikachu, smoking slightly, scampered back to Ash's shoulder, looking tired but proud. Saraphina lowered her now flickering shield, her own energy drained. In the sudden, profound silence, the shiny Lopunny stood over the fallen Tyranider, her chest heaving. She looked at the massive, defeated creature. Then she looked at Ash, Pikachu, and Saraphina. She saw their combined power, their seamless coordination, their unshakable trust. She saw strength of a kind she had never known. She had ruled this wasteland through fear and individual might. She kept her flock safe by being the biggest, baddest monster in the valley. But Ash, he led through unity. He didn't dominate, he elevated. He had turned a chaotic battlefield into a symphony of controlled power. She walked towards them, her movements no longer aggressive, but deliberate. She stopped a few feet from Ash, her ember eyes studying him with a newfound intensity. She wasn't assessing a threat anymore. She was assessing a leader. Then, she did something that shocked him. She gave a short, sharp nod. It was a gesture of concession. A mark of respect. She opened her mouth, and her voice was not what he expected. It wasn't high or soft. It was a throaty, confident alto, roughened by the dry, ashen air. "You're strong," she said, her voice direct and unadorned. "Stronger than me. A leader like you needs a partner who can keep up." She took another step closer, her gaze unwavering. "I'm coming with you." It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement of fact. Like her, it was blunt, powerful, and left no room for argument. Ash looked at her, then at the community of Pokémon she had been protecting. He understood. Her fight was the same as Saraphina's, the same as his. Just her methods were different. She was another guardian, another anchor against the chaos. "What's your name?" he asked. The Lopunny smirked, a flash of white in the grim landscape. "I'm the queen of this dump. I don't need a name." "Everyone needs a name," Ash said simply. He looked at her ember-colored eyes, at the scorched, ashen land around them. "Cinder. Your name is Cinder." She tested the word, a flicker of consideration in her eyes. Cinder. The glowing heart of a fire that refuses to die. She gave another, sharper nod. Cinder. Fine. The return to the Orberg facility was different. Saraphina was a silent, contemplative presence at Ash's side. Cinder was the opposite. She prowled the confines of the transport jet like a caged panther, all restless energy and kinetic potential. She touched everything, tested the strength of the reinforced windows, and regarded the plush seats with suspicion. When they arrived back at the suite, Saraphina had resumed her meditative floating near the window, her psychic energy focused on replenishing itself. The door opened, and Cinder strode in, her powerful gait eating up the space. She took in the sterile room, her nose wrinkling in distaste. Her eyes landed on Saraphina. The air in the room changed instantly. The calm, meditative atmosphere Saraphina cultivated was shattered by the sheer force of Cinder's raw, physical presence. It was like dropping a hot coal into a glass of ice water. Steam and pressure filled the void. "You are loud," Saraphina's voice echoed in the room, a cool, psychic observation laced with a fine edge of disapproval. She didn't turn around. Cinder scoffed, her voice a low, rumbling sound. "You're a ghost." She walked around the conference table, running a hand over the map Ash had been studying. She looked from the hovering, ethereal Gardevoir to Ash, who was standing awkwardly by the door with Pikachu on his shoulder. A slow, predatory smirk spread across Cinder's face. It was a look of dawning realization, of challenge, of pure, unadulterated competitiveness. She had found a new territory, a new hierarchy to conquer. And she had identified her rival for the top spot. She looked Saraphina up and down one more time, a dismissive glance that spoke volumes. Then, her amber gaze locked onto Ash, hot and possessive. "So," Cinder said, her voice a confident purr that held the promise of a brawl. "I have competition." She grinned, a flash of wildness in the civilized room. "Good. I'll prove I'm the only partner you'll ever need." Chapter 3, Contest at the Summit of Kings. The air inside the Winden Stadium was thick with the kind of tension that preceded a world-ending storm. But there were no Pokémon on the pitch, no roaring crowds. The vast, empty stands were a ghostly testament to the stadium's true purpose. Tonight, this cathedral of battle was not for sport, it was a fortress. The entire Galar region was on lockdown, its borders sealed not by gates, but by a fleet of League-sanctioned naval vessels and a constant combat air patrol of Corviknight. At the center of the pitch, under a harsh security spotlight, sat a massive, circular table forged from the same dark metal as Chairman Rose's ill-fated tower. This was the emergency summit. Around the table sat the pillars of the Pokémon world, Cynthia, the champion of Sinnoh, her expression as coolly analytical as the Garchomp standing sentinel behind her chair, Stephen Stone of Hoenn, his metallic suit gleaming, his Skarmory a silent, steely echo of his own composure, Lance, his cape a slash of defiant red, a Dragonite looming behind him like a second shadow. Diantha of Kalos, the Unova Elite Four, and a dozen other regional champions and political leaders filled the remaining seats. They were the strongest trainers on the planet, a council of living legends. And they were all looking at Ash. He sat at the head of the table, the designated seat for the world monarch. He wore no crown, no ostentatious robes of office, just his customary travel jacket and a look of grim purpose. The weight of their combined stares was heavier than any legendary Pokémon he had ever carried. Pikachu was a warm, familiar presence on his lap under the table, a silent source of strength. The argument had been raging for an hour. A full-scale military response is the only logical course of action, barked a gruff, uniformed man, the military advisor for the Galar region. Identify the source of these null fields and obliterate them. A tactical strike with high-yield explosives, and risk destabilizing the very fabric of reality you're trying to save. Cynthia cut in, her voice calm but with an edge that could cut diamond. We are not dealing with a physical enemy. Professor Oak's report was clear, this is an ontological threat. You cannot bomb an idea. Then what do you suggest, Champion Sharona? The military man sneered. We meditate until it goes away. I suggest we listen to the man who has actually faced this threat, Stephen Stone interjected, his voice smooth and resonant as polished steel. He gestured with a perfectly manicured hand towards Ash. Monarch Ketchum, you have been quiet. Ash leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. The room fell silent. He had learned that the most powerful voice in a room was often the one used least. It's not an idea, Ash said, his voice low and steady, commanding the attention of everyone present. And it's not an army. It's a parasite. It feeds on the absence of connection. Where bonds are weak, it takes root. Where life is isolated, it erases. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. My team stabilized 2 nascent zones. One was guarded by a powerful psychic entity holding it back alone. The other was a brutal ecosystem where a single alpha maintained order through force. In both cases, isolation and desperation were the breeding ground. He looked around the table, his gaze meeting each of their eyes in turn. A military strike would only create more chaos, more fear. You'd be feeding it. Cynthia is right. But we can't just defend either. This thing learns. It escalates. It went from a silent erasure to inciting mass violence in a matter of days. So what is the answer, Ash? Lance asked, his usual dramatic flair tempered by genuine concern. I don't have one yet, Ash admitted without a hint of shame. It was a leader's honesty, not a confession of weakness. But I know where to start. We need more information. We need to find the intelligence behind this. Before he could continue, the double doors at the main entrance to the stadium floor swung open. 2 figures stood silhouetted against the bright light of the corridor. The tension in the room instantly shifted, becoming something sharper, more personal. On the left was Saraphina. She moved with an ethereal grace that made it seem like she was gliding rather than walking. Her white form was a beacon of calm in the sterile, anxious environment. She radiated an aura of ancient wisdom and psychic serenity, her cerulean eyes sweeping the room and taking in every detail, every flicker of emotion, every hidden weapon, in a single, effortless glance. She was the picture of diplomatic poise and otherworldly power. On the right was Cinder. She stalked into the room like a predator entering a rival's territory. Her movements were sharp, powerful, her muscles coiled with restless energy. Her ember eyes scanned the assembled champions and their powerful Pokémon not with awe, but with a challenger's appraisal. She saw a room full of potential fights, of reputations waiting to be tested. Her presence was a raw, physical declaration of strength. They had both insisted on accompanying him. Ash, seeing the simmering rivalry between them, had laid down a single condition for their attendance at the summit. My authority here rests on my strength and my judgment, he had told them back in the suite. Tonight, you are not just my Pokémon. You are extensions of my will. One of you will represent my wisdom, the other my power. Show them, and me, which role you claim. It was a test, and the contest had begun the moment they stepped off the plane. Saraphina moved silently to stand behind Ash's right shoulder. She didn't speak, but a collective sigh of subtle relief seemed to pass through the more diplomatically inclined members of the table. Her very presence was calming, a psychic balm on the frayed nerves of the room. Cinder, on the other hand, scoffed at the idea of standing still. She began a slow, deliberate patrol around the perimeter of the circular table, her gait confident and challenging. Her eyes lingered for a moment on Cynthia's Garchomp, then on Lance's Dragonite. It was not a threat, but a measurement. The powerful Pokémon tensed under her gaze, recognizing a fellow apex predator. "Ketchum, what is the meaning of this?" the Galar military advisor demanded, unnerved by Cinder's prowling. "This is a secure meeting." "She's my security," Ash replied calmly, not taking his eyes off the man. Cinder smirked. The meeting continued, but the dynamic had shifted. Saraphina became Ash's silent counsel. While a pompous Colosian delegate droned on about economic impacts, Ash felt a gentle nudge in his mind. "He is lying," Saraphina's voice echoed, cool and clear. "He speaks of stability, but his heart is full of fear for his personal vineyards in the affected province. His primary trade partner, the delegate from Sinnoh, feels a similar anxiety. They are discussing a private trade route protection scheme. They can be leveraged." Ash subtly changed his line of questioning, his inquiries suddenly razor-sharp and impossibly prescient. He cornered the Colosian delegate, exposing the selfishness of his position not with accusations, but with questions that left him no room to maneuver. The man sputtered, his face turning red, while Cynthia shot Ash a look of impressed curiosity. She felt the shift in the room but couldn't see the hand guiding it. Saraphina had made Ash the most perceptive man in the room, cutting through political falsehoods like a psychic blade through silk. Meanwhile, the high society aspect of the summit began. After the initial tense briefing, the champions and leaders mingled, forming alliances and trading whispers over glasses of chilled blackberry juice served by impeccably dressed waiters. It was a different kind of battlefield, one of etiquette, influence, and veiled threats. Saraphina was in her element. She moved through the crowd at Ash's side, a vision of untouchable grace. She didn't need to speak. When a particularly oily politician tried to corner Ash, Saraphina would simply turn her head and meet his gaze with her deep, cerulean eyes. The politician would falter, his train of thought lost, a sudden, inexplicable feeling of shame washing over him as if his every petty thought had just been laid bare for the world to see. She deflected unwanted conversations, drew in potential allies with her serene presence, and gathered whispers of intelligence from the minds of gossiping aides. She was a scalpel, dismantling the social power structure of the room with an elegance that was both beautiful and terrifying. Cinder, by contrast, looked about as comfortable as a Blaziken in a swimming pool. She stood with her arms crossed, leaning against a stadium support pillar, her expression a thunderous mask of boredom and contempt. The polite chatter, the fake smiles, the delicate clinking of glasses, it was all anathema to her. She watched Saraphina's effortless social maneuvering with a mixture of disdain and grudging annoyance. That wasn't real power. It was just tricks. Her moment came unexpectedly. A group of waiters began moving through the crowd, offering a new tray of refreshments. They were seamless, professional, their movements perfectly synchronized. Too perfect. Cinder's eyes narrowed. Her primal senses, honed by a life of surviving ambushes, screamed at her. She didn't sense auras like Saraphina, she smelled intent. And these waiters smelled wrong. They didn't smell of catering school and minimum wage. They smelled of sweat, steel, and adrenaline. Saraphina felt it a second later. A spike of murderous intent, carefully shielded until the last possible moment. Ash. Ambush. Her voice screamed in his mind. But Cinder was already moving. She had been leaning against a pillar 20 yards away. In the instant it took for Saraphina's warning to form, Cinder had crossed that distance. One of the waiters, his hand moving under his tray towards a hidden weapon, suddenly found his wrist locked in a grip of iron. Cinder didn't say a word. She twisted. There was a sharp, sickening snap of bone, and the man crumpled with a choked scream, the tray and its contents clattering to the floor. All hell broke loose. The other 5 waiters dropped their disguises. They threw off their jackets to reveal black tactical gear, their faces hidden by dark visors. From their belts, they drew not guns, but strange, dark gray rods that hummed with a malevolent energy. Panic erupted. Champions shouted for their Pokémon, but the assassins were fast and brutally efficient, targeting the human leaders first. One lunged for Diantha, the champion of Kalos. Before her Gardevoir could even materialize its Pokeball, a blur of cream and brown intercepted the attack. Cinder met the assassin head-on. He swung his null rod in a vicious arc. Cinder didn't block it. She ducked under it, the air sizzling where the rod passed, and slammed the heel of her palm into his chest. The impact was like a battering ram. The assassin was launched backwards, flying a good 15 feet before crashing into the refreshments table in a shower of glass and broken hors d'oeuvres. A second assassin came at her from the side. She spun on her heel, her long, fluffy ear whipping around like a weighted rope and catching him squarely in the face. The blow was solid and humiliating, stunning him for the split second she needed. She followed it up with a lightning-fast kick to his solar plexus that drove the air from his lungs and sent him to his knees, gasping. It was a whirlwind of brutal, efficient violence. No wasted motion. No flashy moves. Just pure, unadulterated combat dominance. Where Saraphina was a scalpel, Cinder was a sledgehammer, and she was bringing the house down. Lance's Dragonite finally let out a furious roar and prepared to unleash a hyper beam, but Ash held up a hand. No. They're too close to the delegates. Let her work. Cinder was a master of close-quarters combat. She weaved through the panicking politicians, a guardian angel of fury. She disabled a third assassin by sweeping his legs out from under him and stomping on his weapon hand, shattering both the rod and the bones beneath it. The fourth she simply grabbed by the front of his tactical vest and threw bodily into the fifth, sending them both tumbling into a heap. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. 5 highly trained assassins, neutralized. Cinder stood in the middle of the wreckage, chest heaving slightly, her ember eyes burning with the thrill of the fight. She hadn't even broken a sweat. The assembled champions and their legendary Pokémon stared, dumbfounded. They had been prepared for a Pokémon battle. They had just witnessed a one-woman demolition crew. Ash walked calmly over to the first assassin Cinder had taken down, the one with the broken wrist. He knelt, ignoring the man's pained groans, and picked up the dropped null rod. It was cold to the touch, and it seemed to absorb the light around it. It felt identical to the energy he'd felt in the dead zones. Suddenly, the assassin began to convulse. His eyes rolled back in his head, and his voice, when it came out, was not his own. It was a distorted, electronic monotone, layered and cold. A predictable display of force, Monarch Ketchum. Ash froze. Every leader in the room fell silent. This voice was not human. It was being broadcast through the man. Your bonds are so fragile, the voice continued, laced with a chilling, academic curiosity. You gather your strongest, and they are protected by a beast who understands only violence. You surround yourself with intellect, and it is guarded by a phantom who cannot even throw a punch. Such a messy, inefficient system. Ash's eyes narrowed. Who is this? The assassin's head turned, his neck creaking at an unnatural angle, to look directly at Ash. I am Silus. And I am a simple researcher. My field of study is dissolution. I am merely observing the inevitable decay of complex systems into their base state of quiet nothingness. You hired these men, Ash stated, his voice dangerously low. Hired? No, Silus's voice replied with a hint of amusement. These men were acolytes of a forgotten doomsday cult. I simply gave them a more tangible god to worship. The promise of an ending. They were a test. A variable. I wanted to see which of your consorts would prove more useful in a practical crisis. The conclusion is fascinating. The assassin's eyes flickered between the panting Cinder and the composed Saraphina, who now stood beside Ash, her psychic energy a tense, defensive shield. The brawler is effective, but crude. A tool for a simple problem. The psychic is elegant, but her power is useless against a true believer's lack of doubt, Silus mused. It seems you require both. How inefficient. What do you want, Silus? Ash demanded. The voice laughed, a dry, crackling sound like static. Want? I want what all true scholars desire, a definitive answer to my hypothesis. That existence is a flaw. A chaotic, painful aberration. And that the purest state, the only true peace, is the absolute zero of non-existence. I am merely the herald of the coming equilibrium. The null. The assassin's body began to smoke, a gray, static-y vapor rising from his skin. This vessel is expiring, Silus said, his tone bored. A word of advice, monarch. Stop trying to mend the threads. You are merely delaying the unraveling. The world doesn't need a savior. It needs an ending. With a final, violent convulsion, the assassin went limp. A wisp of grey smoke escaped his lips and dissipated into nothing. The connection was severed. Silence descended upon the stadium floor, heavy and absolute. The attack had failed, but the psychological blow had landed perfectly. Silus hadn't tried to kill them. He had put on a show. He had introduced himself, stated his thesis, and dismissed them all as an irrelevant variable in his grand experiment. He had turned the world's most powerful leaders into lab rats. Ash stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at Cinder, who was still vibrating with post-battle adrenaline, her chest puffed out with pride at her swift victory. Then he looked at Saraphina, whose calm exterior was betrayed by the tight clench of her fists, her mind reeling from the casual cruelty and alien intellect of the being they had just encountered. Both had proven their worth in spectacular, opposing fashion. Saraphina had won the political battle, giving Ash the upper hand in the war of minds. Cinder had won the physical battle, saving dozens of lives with brutal, decisive action. The contest was a draw. The rivalry had just been given a new, terrifyingly sharp edge. And Ash, standing between the ghost and the brawler, had never felt more alone in his leadership. The enemy now had a name, and his shadow stretched far longer than anyone in the room could possibly have imagined. Chapter 4, The Whispering Ruins. The Crown Tundra was a land of biting frost and ancient secrets. Jagged peaks clawed at a perpetually slate-gray sky, and the wind that howled down from the heights carried the chill of millennia. It was a place where the veil between worlds felt thin, a land of sleeping giants and forgotten legends. And it was here, according to the fragments of data salvaged from the assassin's corrupted comms units, that Silus had his primary research outpost. Ash's private jet cut through the turbulent air, its advanced system struggling against the unnatural weather patterns that plagued the region. The flight had been quiet, thick with an unspoken tension. Cinder, still riding the high of her victory at the summit, was restless. She paced the length of the cabin, shadowboxing, her body a tightly coiled spring of energy demanding release. She saw the mission ahead as simple: find Silus, and break him. Saraphina was the opposite. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes closed. But Ash, now attuned to her psychic presence, could feel the storm within her. She was replaying Silus's words over and over, dissecting his cold philosophy, trying to comprehend a mind that saw beauty in nothingness. It was a concept so alien to her, a being defined by empathy and connection, that it bordered on psychic poison. Her elegance was a mask for a deep, profound disquiet. Ash stood between them, a map of the Crown Tundra spread on the jet's galley table. He was studying the location pinpointed by their intelligence, the ruins of an ancient temple designated only as the frigid sanctum. It was a place older than Galar's recorded history, rumored to be a nexus where the energies of life, time, and space converged. A perfect place for someone studying dissolution to set up shop. "This weather isn't natural," Ash said, his voice cutting through the silence. "The cold is empty. It's like the dead zone in Whisperwood, but weaponized." "He is here," Saraphina's voice entered his mind, faint and strained. "His thoughts are like cracks in a frozen lake. He is actively warping the very fabric of this place to hide his work." The jet's landing was rough, the pilot fighting winds that seemed to come from all directions at once. They set down in a windswept valley, the only patch of ground flat enough to accommodate the aircraft. The moment the ramp lowered, the cold hit them. It wasn't a normal, biting cold. It was a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to bypass their insulated gear and leach the warmth directly from their bones. It was the cold of a tomb. "Okay, this is just stupid," Cinder grumbled, her breath pluming in a thick white cloud. She did a few quick hops on the balls of her feet, her body generating a palpable aura of heat in defiance of the oppressive cold. "Let's find this Silus geek and get somewhere warm." "Stay close," Ash warned. "This place isn't just cold. It's wrong." He was right. As they began their trek towards the coordinates, the landscape began to shift in subtle, nauseating ways. A distant mountain peak would appear to be a mile away one moment, and looming directly over them the next. The path beneath their feet seemed to stretch and compress. Time itself felt sluggish, each footstep taking an eternity, only for them to suddenly find themselves 100 yards ahead of where they were a second ago. It was a non-Euclidean nightmare, a landscape painted by a mad god. "Pika, Pika Pi," Pikachu chittered nervously from Ash's shoulder, his ears twitching as he tried and failed to get a bearing. "I can't get a lock on a stable path." Cinder snarled in frustration after nearly walking off a cliff that hadn't been there a moment before. "It's like the ground is moving under us." "It is," Saraphina confirmed, her voice a strained whisper. She had one hand pressed to her temple, her brow furrowed in concentration. "He has turned this entire area into a spatio-temporal labyrinth. We are walking through the folds of reality. Hold on to my psychic signature. It is the only anchor we have." Seraphina's body began to emit a soft, cerulean glow. She became a living lighthouse in the disorienting landscape. In Ash's mind, he suddenly perceived a faint, shimmering blue thread snaking through the chaos, a single, stable path through the madness. He grabbed Cinder's arm. "This way. Follow her light. Don't look anywhere else," he commanded. Cinder grumbled but complied, her hand gripping Ash's jacket. Her own raw, physical senses were useless here. For the first time, she was forced to rely completely on Seraphina's power, and the dependence chafed at her pride. They moved as a single unit, a trio bound by a thread of psychic light. They walked past vistas of impossible geometry, waterfalls that flowed upwards into the grey sky, forests of ice crystals that chimed with the sound of forgotten memories, rock formations that twisted into the shape of screaming faces. The air was filled with whispers, fragments of conversations from different eras, the ghosts of sound trapped in the temporal eddies. It was a full-blown assault on the senses, designed to drive any intruder mad. After what could have been an hour or a lifetime, the shimmering blue path ended. They stood before the entrance to the frigid sanctum. It was less a building and more a wound in the mountainside, a jagged archway of black, unidentifiable rock that seemed to drink the light. The air flowing from it was colder still, carrying with it a sense of profound and ancient melancholy. "This is it," Ash said, his voice low. Finally, Cinder cracked her knuckles, the sound unervingly loud in the sudden silence. "Time to punch something." "Be careful," Seraphina warned, her glow fading as she conserved her energy. "The distortion is strongest inside. He is protecting something." They stepped through the archway and into the darkness. The interior was a vast, cavernous space, the walls lined with geometric patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the low light of Ash's tactical lamp. The floor was a smooth, polished obsidian that reflected their images with unnerving clarity. And at the center of the chamber, they found him. Silus was not the monstrous figure they might have expected. He was a man of indeterminate age, with thinning gray hair and the pale, soft skin of someone who has spent their life indoors. He wore a simple, clean lab coat over a plain gray tunic. He was standing before a massive, dormant shape that dominated the center of the cavern, the legendary Pokemon Regigigas, but not as it appeared in the history books. It was encased in a complex latticework of dark metal and humming conduits, its body still and lifeless, a titan on a life support machine designed by a madman. Silus didn't seem surprised to see them. He turned from his console, a faint, dispassionate smile on his face. He held a datapad in one hand, which he consulted briefly before looking up at them. "Ah, the monarch, the brawler, and the empath," he said, his voice the same calm, electronic monotone from the summit. "You navigated my little maze faster than my projections suggested. Your psychic's power is, remarkably stable. I must remember to factor in the unpredictable variable of emotional conviction." "Silus." Cinder snarled, taking a step forward. "Your little games are over." "Games?" Silus tilted his head, a gesture of genuine curiosity. "My dear creature, this is not a game. This is the most important scientific endeavor in the history of existence. I am on the verge of the ultimate discovery." He gestured with a sweep of his hand towards the dormant Regigigas. "This is a titan of creation. It is said that Regigigas towed the continents into place with ropes. It is a being whose very nature is to build, to shape, to order. It is the ultimate expression of the universe's pointless, chaotic drive to become something. What are you doing to it?" Ash demanded, his eyes fixed on the dark conduit snaking into the legendary's form. He could feel the faintest flicker of life within the giant, a slow, deep pulse that was being systematically suppressed. "Doing?" Silus looked back at the titan with something approaching affection. "I am helping it. I am, correcting a design flaw. I am using the null's deconstructive principles to reverse its core programming. I am teaching the ultimate creator the beauty of uncreation. Once I am finished, Regigigas will not tow continents. It will erase them. It will become my ultimate tool for ushering in the great stillness." The sheer, cold ambition of his plan was breathtaking. He wasn't just corrupting a legendary, he was inverting its very concept. "You're a monster," Cinder spat. Silus actually laughed, a short, dry chuckle. "A monster? Am I? Or am I a mercy killer? Look." He tapped a command into his console. The obsidian floor beneath their feet suddenly shimmered, and the cavern was flooded with images. They weren't holograms, they were windows, ripped from time and space. They saw a battlefield from the Great War of Kalos, 3,000 years ago. Pokemon and humans dying in fire and mud, their last moments filled with terror and pain. They saw a mother in a small Johto village, weeping over her sick child as a famine ravaged the land. They saw the anguish of Pokemon abandoned by their trainers, the loneliness of an old man dying alone in a hospital, the fury of a natural disaster wiping out a generation of life. It was a relentless, overwhelming montage of suffering, loss, and despair, broadcast on a loop. "This is existence, Monarch Ketchum," Silus said, his voice softening into something resembling pity. "A cycle of fleeting joys punctuated by inevitable, crushing agony. Every bond you cherish will one day be broken by death or betrayal. Every victory you celebrate is built on the foundation of another's defeat. Every life born is a new vessel for pain. Don't you see? The universe is a failed experiment." Saraphina let out a small, choked gasp, staggering as the sheer weight of the projected agony washed over her empathic senses. It was a psychic tsunami of grief. Ash put a hand on her shoulder to steady her, his own face pale. "I offer an alternative," Silus continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a messianic preacher. "The null. Absolute peace. No pain, because there is no one left to feel it. No loss, because there is nothing to lose. The final, perfect, eternal silence. I am not destroying the world. I am saving it from the disease of consciousness. He looked directly at Ash, his eyes holding a strange, pleading light. You, of all people, should understand. You have seen so much pain, fought so many pointless battles. I can give you the power to end it. All of it. Forever. Join me, Ash. Be the one who finally turns off the light on this miserable, broken reality. The temptation was insidious. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, Ash felt the weight of his own long, violent history. He saw the faces of friends he'd lost, the scars of battles he'd won at great cost, the endless parade of new threats rising to replace the old. Silus's offer was a siren song of ultimate peace. An end to the struggle. Cinder felt it too, in her own way. The endless fight for survival, the struggle for dominance, the constant need to be stronger than whatever was trying to kill her. The idea of a place with no more fights, no more threats, it was a strange kind of paradise. But then Ash looked down. He saw Saraphina, trembling but resolute, her hand gripping his forearm, sharing her strength. He saw Cinder, her fists clenched, her face a mask of conflict, but her stance still squarely at his side. He saw Pikachu on his shoulder, who met his gaze with an unwavering look of absolute trust. Bonds. Struggle. Love. Silus saw them as flaws. Ash knew, in the deepest core of his being, that they were the entire point. You're wrong, Ash said, his voice clear and ringing with a newfound certainty that cut through the miasma of despair. The pain is real. So is the loss. But you're blind to the other half of the equation. He thought of the pride on Charizard's face after a hard-won victory. The unconditional love in his mother's hug. The joy of discovering a new Pokémon. The quiet comfort of watching a sunset with his oldest friend. Struggle is what makes a victory mean something, Ash declared, his own aura beginning to flare, a brilliant, defiant blue that pushed back against the projected images of sorrow. Loss is what makes the time we have precious. And pain is the price we pay for love. And it's a price I would pay 1,000,000 times over. You see a broken machine. I see a beautiful, chaotic, perfect mess. And I will not let you take it away. Silus's face fell. The pity was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical disappointment. I see. A failure in reasoning. You are too deeply embedded in the system to see its flaws. A shame. He tapped his console again. Then the lesson must be, more direct. The conduits attached to Regigigas flared with a sickly purple light. A wave of pure, negative energy pulsed through the chamber. It didn't feel like an attack, it felt like subtraction. Ash felt a sudden, dizzying emptiness, as if a part of his own memory had been scooped out. He momentarily forgot Pikachu's name. The Pokémon Silus used were not Pokémon at all. They were glitches in reality, summoned from the spaces between moments. A Skarmory whose wings were razor-sharp paradoxes, cutting through space by being in two places at once. A Weevil that was little more than a living shadow, its claws leaving trails of absolute cold that froze not water, but possibility. The battle was a nightmare. Saraphina, still reeling from the psychic assault, found her attacks, Moonblast, Psychic, Shadow Ball, passing straight through them. They had no physical form to attack. They are not here. She cried out in frustration. They are echoes from a future that has been erased. Cinder had enough of the weirdness. She charged, her fighting style a grounding force of pure physicality. She couldn't punch a paradox, but she could punch the spot where the paradox was going to be. Her instincts were her guide. She launched a high jump kick at the Skarmory, and for a moment, her leg seemed to phase through its wing, but the raw kinetic energy of her blow disrupted its temporal loop, causing it to flicker and stall. Ash and Pikachu fought as one. Pikachu, don't aim for them. Aim for the space they affect. Use Electro-Ebb to change the battlefield. Pikachu leaped, spinning a massive net of crackling golden energy. He didn't try to catch the phantoms. He threw the web onto the obsidian floor, the electricity arcing and creating a zone of stable, positive energy. When the Weevil shadow passed over it, its form solidified for a split second, its incorporeal nature momentarily grounded. Now, Cinder! Ash yelled. Cinder was already there. With a roar of furious determination, she slammed a focus punch into the now solid Weevil, shattering it into a million motes of fading darkness. They were working together. The empath, the brawler, and the monarch. Saraphina was no longer attacking, but predicting, her psychic senses mapping the impossible movements of their enemies, feeding the information directly into Ash's and Cinder's minds. The Skarmory will rematerialize to your left in 0.8 seconds. Cinder spun, a kick already in motion, and met the creature as it appeared. Ash and Pikachu provided the area of effect control, using electricity to impose the rules of reality onto a battlefield that sought to have none. Silus watched from his console, his expression unreadable. He wasn't watching a battle, he was gathering data. They fought their way across the chamber, a desperate, coordinated advance towards the console and the captive Regigigas. They were winning, but the cost was immense. The null energy was sapping their stamina, their memories, their very will to fight. Finally, they were through. Cinder, with a final, savage kick, launched the last phantom creature into the energy conduit surrounding Regigigas, causing a cascade of sparks and a system-wide power surge. Silus didn't even flinch. He simply tapped a final command on his datapad. Data acquisition complete. Commencing strategic withdrawal. The entire chamber began to shake. The black rock of the walls started to crumble, not into dust, but into pixels of nothingness. The ruin was deleting itself. He's getting away. Cinder yelled, starting towards Silus. Leave him. Ash shouted, grabbing her arm. We have to get out of here. He looked at the Regigigas. He couldn't just leave it. He ran to the central console, slamming his fist down on the emergency release panel. With a hiss of depressurizing pneumatics, the dark metal conduits retracted from the Titan's body. The chamber was collapsing around them. The floor was disappearing beneath their feet. Saraphina. Get us out. Ash yelled. Saraphina, her face pale with exhaustion, nodded. She threw her arms wide, and a bubble of shimmering psychic energy enveloped the four of them and the now free, but still dormant, Regigigas. She lifted them from the disintegrating floor, rocketing them up and out of the collapsing sanctum just as the entrance archway dissolved into a final wisp of gray static. They landed hard in the snow outside. The non-Euclidean distortions had vanished. The wind was just a normal, cold wind. The frigid sanctum was gone, leaving behind only a smooth, unmarked cliff face, as if it had never existed. They had driven Silus away, and they had saved the Titan. But it was a hollow victory. He hadn't been defeated. He had simply finished his experiment and left. A quiet understanding passed between Saraphina and Cinder. In the face of that cold, alien intellect, their rivalry felt small, almost childish. For the first time, they looked at each other not as competitors, but as fellow soldiers who had survived a battle against an enemy they were only just beginning to understand. The seed of mutual respect, planted in the heat of combat, had begun to sprout. Chapter 5, The Weight of the Crown. The world was scared. For the first time since the darkest days of the Second Galar Crisis, a palpable fear had gripped the globe. News of the Null, once a classified secret whispered between champions, had bled into the public consciousness. It started with garbled reports from the Whisperwood, then eyewitness accounts from the Ashen caldera, and finally, leaked, shaky camera footage from the Winden summit attack. The media dubbed Silus, the ghost of nothing, a bogeyman whose motives were as terrifying as they were incomprehensible. Panic was a virus, and it was spreading faster than the dead zones. Stock markets fluctuated wildly. Travel between regions plummeted. Trainers were recalling their Pokémon from the wild, fearing they would be corrupted or simply driven mad. The global network of trust and cooperation that Ash had spent his entire life reinforcing was beginning to fray at the seams. The null didn't need to erase the world was starting to erase itself out of fear. The pressure fell, as it always did, on the monarch. The war room was Ash's suite in the Galar League's battle tower, transformed into the nerve center of a global conflict. The plush carpets were covered with power cables, the stylish furniture pushed against the walls to make room for a central holographic command table. On it, a map of the world glowed, dotted with the angry red of confirmed null zones and 100 smaller, blinking yellow lights indicating areas of psychic disturbance or unusual Pokémon behavior. Ash stood before the map, his hands clasped behind his back. The easy confidence he usually carried had been tempered into a harder, more focused resolve. The weight of his title, of the world's hope and fear, was a physical presence in the room. Pikachu sat on the edge of the table, his small form a study in seriousness, his gaze fixed on his partner. Arrayed around the table were the faces of his most trusted allies, patched in via secure holographic links. Cynthia, from her library in Celestic Town, her face etched with concern. Stephen Stone, broadcasting from the high-tech command center of the Devon Corporation. Lance, pacing before the throne of the Indigo Plateau Champions room. Leon, Galar's own undefeatable hero, looking more worried than Ash had ever seen him. And in the room with him, standing on opposite sides of the table, were Saraphina and Cinder. The easy camaraderie forged in the collapsing ruins of the frigid sanctum had evaporated under the strain of the global crisis. Their rivalry had returned, but it was no longer about winning Ash's affection. It had evolved into something far more serious, a fundamental, ideological clash over the soul of their strategy. The data from the frigid sanctum is clear, Cynthia said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Silus is a data gatherer. Each encounter has been an experiment. He provokes a response, records it, and refines his methods. The aggression in the ashen caldera was a test of induced chaos. The temporal distortions in the crown tundra were a test of ontological warfare. So every time we fight him, we're teaching him how to fight us better, Leon concluded, running a hand through his purple hair. That's not a champion time, is it? Worse, Stephen added, his sharp eyes focused on a stream of data scrolling beside his hologram. He's using that data to automate the process. We're seeing microzones appear now, too small for us to track effectively, but each one running a slightly different variant of the null corruption. He's running a planetary-scale simulation to find the most efficient method of dissolution. The sheer scale of their enemy's intellect was crushing. They weren't fighting a man, they were fighting a sentient, malevolent scientific method. It was Cinder who broke the paralysis. She slammed her fist onto the holographic table, causing the map of the world to flicker violently. So we stop letting him run his tests, she snarled, her voice a raw cry of frustrated power. Her eyes burned with a fierce, pragmatic light. We're the strongest trainers in the world. We have a dozen legends loyal to us. We know where his last base was. We know his energy signature. We go on the offensive. A global manhunt. We form strike teams, elite squads of our best, and we hunt him down. We kick in every door of every abandoned lab and forgotten ruin from here to the distortion world until we find him. No more reacting. We hit him. Hard. We don't give him time to think, or plan, or gather his damn data. Her philosophy was as blunt and powerful as her fighting style, overwhelming force, directed at the heart of the problem. Several of the more martial leaders, including Lance, nodded in agreement. The idea of taking the fight to the enemy was a seductive one. A bold strategy, Cynthia said, her tone carefully neutral. But a flawed one. All eyes turned to her, then to Saraphina, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She had been feeding her own analysis to Cynthia through a private psychic channel. Your plan is predicated on the assumption that Silus is a commander hiding in a fortress. Seraphina's voice entered the minds of everyone in the room, a cool, clear counterpoint to Cinder's fiery outburst. She had decided telepathy was more efficient for this council. He is not. He is a consciousness. A distributed network. The man we met in the tundra may have been the primary node, but he is not the entirety of Silus. She gestured a slender hand towards the glowing map. An all-out offensive is exactly what he would expect. It is the classic, heroic response. He will have planned for it. He will lead your strike teams on a wild goose chase, tying up our strongest assets while his automated zones continue to multiply. He will turn our own strength against us. You will be fighting the shadow while the man slips away in the darkness. The room fell silent again. Cinder glared at Saraphina, her fists clenching. She hated this. She hated the way Saraphina could dismantle her straightforward, honest plan with a few sentences of untouchable psychic logic. Then what's your brilliant plan, Your Highness? Cinder retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We sit here and meditate while the world falls apart. No, Saraphina replied, her calm completely unruffled. We change the conditions of the experiment. Silus's power, the null itself, feeds on isolation and disconnection. Therefore, our strategy should not be to project force, but to project connection. We fortify. We don't hunt him, we starve him. She pointed to a series of locations on the map that began to glow with a soft, cerulean light. Mount Coronet. The Tree of Beginning. The Lake of the Sun and Moon. Altar of the Ancients. Places of immense, intrinsic auric and spiritual power. These are the world's nerve endings, Saraphina explained. We establish a global defense network. We station our most powerful psychic and aura-sensitive Pokémon at these nexus points. We don't build walls of brick, but walls of interconnected energy. We create a planetary aura grid. Instead of allowing him to isolate and erase communities, we will link them. We will strengthen the very bonds he seeks to sever. We will make the entire world so psychically and spiritually interconnected that there is no absence for the null to take root in. We make the world anathema to his very existence. It was a breathtakingly ambitious plan, a strategy of healing as a form of warfare. Stephen Stone's eyes lit up, seeing the elegant symmetry of it. Cynthia nodded slowly, appreciating the deep, strategic thinking. Ash was torn. He stood in the crossfire of two brilliant, compelling, and utterly contradictory strategies. Cinder's plan was a punch to the jaw. It was aggressive, decisive, and spoke to the part of Ash that was tired of being on the defensive. It was a plan of action. Saraphina's plan was a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. It was subtle, intelligent, and addressed the root cause of the problem, not just the symptoms. It was a plan of healing. And they both looked to him for the final word. The monarch's decision. He closed his eyes, the holographic light of the world map playing across his face. He felt the weight of billions of lives, human and Pokémon, resting on his shoulders. He saw the logic in both arguments. A direct assault was risky but could end the threat quickly if it succeeded. A defensive grid was safer but would take time to establish, time during which more people could suffer. He felt the intense, passionate certainty radiating from Cinder. Trust me. My strength will protect you. He felt the cool, deep conviction flowing from Saraphina. Trust me. My wisdom will guide you. He couldn't choose one. Choosing one would mean dismissing the other, and he knew, with an instinct that had never failed him, that both were right. And both were wrong. Cinder's plan ignored the enemy's nature. Saraphina's plan ignored the enemy's speed. So he would not choose. He would lead. He opened his eyes, and the conflict in them was gone, replaced by the serene clarity of command. We'll do both. The room went silent. Cinder and Saraphina stared at him, both looking equally shocked. That's not possible, Lance said, shaking his head. Our forces are already stretched thin. We can't mount a full-scale offensive and a global defensive initiative at the same time. We're not going to mount a full-scale offensive, Ash corrected him, his voice ringing with newfound authority. He walked around the table, his presence dominating the room. We're not going on a manhunt. We're going to perform surgery. He pointed at the map. Stephen, your research teams have been tracking the energy signature of Silus's tech. I want you to identify the 5 largest, most stable null generators outside of the active dead zones. The primary hubs of his network. Stephen blinked, then a slow grin spread across his face as he understood. The command nodes for his automated simulations. Done. Ash then turned his gaze to Cinder. Cinder, you will lead the strike teams. Not large armies. Small, elite squads. Fast, quiet, and overwhelming. Your objective is not to find Silus. Your objective is to decapitate his network. You will lead a series of simultaneous, coordinated lightning raids on those 5 hubs. You get in, you destroy the generator, and you get out. No engagement with Silus. No chasing ghosts. Surgical strikes. Can you do that? Cinder's eyes lit up. This was a mission she understood. It was a focused application of her core philosophy. It wasn't a wild goose chase, it was a series of targeted demolitions. It was a chance to hit the enemy where it hurt. She gave him a sharp, confident nod. Give me the targets. I'll break them. Ash then turned to Saraphina. Saraphina, your plan is brilliant, but it will take too long. We don't have time to fortify the entire world. So we triage. He pointed back at the map. While Cinder's teams are preparing, you will coordinate with the other psychics, Caitlin, Sabrina, Olympia, and identify the most vulnerable communities, the places where the null is likely to strike next. Not the legendary nexus points, but the towns, the villages, the hospitals. The places where fear is greatest. He looked at her, his expression softening for a moment. You will lead the Guardian Corps. You will establish your psychic network, but you will focus it on protecting the weak, not the strong. You will build your wall of hope around the people who need it most. Can you do that? Seraphina looked at him, and for a moment, the psychic saw not a monarch, but the boy from Pallet Town who would climb a mountain in a blizzard to save a single Pokémon. He hadn't just combined their plans, he had understood the heart of them and found a better way. Her plan had been about protecting concepts. He had made it about protecting people. A rare, genuine smile touched her lips, and her mental voice was full of a warmth that went beyond simple agreement. It will be done, Ash. We will be their shield. It was a masterful compromise, a synthesis of power and wisdom that left everyone in the room, both physical and holographic, in stunned admiration. He had taken 2 opposing viewpoints and woven them into a single, cohesive strategy that honored both. But in that moment of strategic triumph, new, colder reality settled in. He was splitting his forces. More than that, he was splitting his 2 most powerful, most personal allies. He was placing his trust, and the fate of the world, on their ability to execute their opposing philosophies in perfect harmony. The decision created a new, subtle rift. Cinder, given command of the offensive, felt a surge of validation. Ash had trusted her strength. Seraphina, given command of the defense, felt a similar validation. Ash had trusted her wisdom. But in that validation was an isolating pride. Each believed that their half of the plan was the more critical, the more essential. The competition hadn't ended, it had simply been moved to a global stage. Who could save the world better? The fist or the mind? As the council disbanded, the champions rushing to implement Ash's orders, he was left alone in the war room with his 2 powerful partners. The air was electric with their ambition. I won't fail you, Cinder said, her voice low and fierce, her hand already reaching for the data pad with the first target coordinates. The people will be safe, Seraphina promised, her form already shimmering as she began to reach out with her mind to psychics across the globe. They both left, one striding out the door with purpose, the other fading into a meditative trance, each consumed by their new, monumental task. Ash stood alone before the map of the world, Pikachu finally hopping from the table onto his shoulder. The weight of the crown felt heavier than ever. He had made the perfect strategic choice. But he had also just sent the two beings he was closest to down separate, dangerous paths, driven by their endless rivalry. He could only hope that the bonds holding the three of them together were strong enough to withstand the strain. Chapter 6, A Heart-Eclipsed Cinder was born for this. The roar of the wind, the biting cold of high-altitude flight, the thrum of a military-grade transport jet under her feet, it was a symphony of glorious purpose. She stood at the open ramp of the stealth craft, the dark skies of northern Johto whipping past below. Her team, a hand-picked squad of 5 elite League Ace trainers, stood behind her, their faces grim and focused. They were the tip of the spear. Target is the abandoned radio observatory on Mount Silver, the pilot's voice crackled over their comms. Intel confirms it's housing a Tier 1 null generator. Hostile presence is expected to be minimal. Silus's automated defenses are sophisticated, but this unit is primarily a broadcast and data relay hub. Your mission is smash and grab. Get in, plant the charge, get out. Cinder grinned, a flash of predatory excitement. Minimal resistance. That's a shame. She looked back at her team. You heard him. We're the thunder. I'm the lightning. Follow my lead, and stay out of my way. Without another word, she leaped from the ramp. She didn't use a parachute. She fell like a stone for 1,000 feet, her body perfectly streamlined, before she pushed off the air itself, a faint shimmer of her own power breaking her descent. She landed on the snow-swept roof of the observatory with a silent crunch, a ghost delivered from the sky. Her team rappelled down a moment later, their professionalism a stark contrast to her raw, instinctive grace. The raid was brutally, almost poetically, efficient. They blew the reinforced access hatch, and Cinder was the first one through the hole. The automated defenses came online, turrets firing bolts of negative energy, robotic drones swarming from the walls. Cinder moved through them like a force of nature. She didn't dodge, she plowed forward. A kick shattered a turret from its mounting. A spinning clothesline move took out 3 drones in a single, fluid motion. Her team followed in her wake, their Pokémon providing covering fire, a well-oiled machine cleaning up the mess left by a hurricane. She led them through the maze of cold, humming corridors, her senses guiding her unerringly towards the thrum of the null generator. They reached the central chamber, a massive satellite dish pointed not at the sky, but down into the earth, broadcasting its song of entropy into the planet's ley lines. It was guarded by another of Silus's phantom Pokémon, a spectral Jengar that flickered and laughed, its form intangible. I got this, Cinder said, cracking her knuckles. While her team planted the custom-built Chronoton charge designed by the Devon Corporation, she faced the Phantom. This time, she didn't try to outsmart it. She met its reality-bending nature with the sheer, undeniable reality of her own power. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, focusing. The air around her fists began to shimmer. She wasn't channeling aura like Ash, or psychic energy like Saraphina. She was channeling her own life force, her indomitable will to exist. When she opened her eyes, her fists were glowing with a fierce, hot white light. The Jengar lunged, its shadow claws phasing through the material world to strike at her soul. Cinder met the attack with a punch. The moment her glowing fist met the Phantom's claws, there was a screech of tearing reality. Her fist, so grounded in the physical world, so utterly real, was anathema to the Jengar's ghostly nature. The Phantom shrieked and recoiled, its form solidifying in agony. Cinder didn't give it a chance to recover. A flurry of glowing punches and kicks followed, each blow a declaration of existence that shattered the Phantom's fragile hold on its borrowed form. It dissolved into a final, mournful wisp of smoke. Charge is set, one of the aces shouted. Let's go. Cinder commanded. They were in and out in under 5 minutes. As their jet ascended into the dark sky, a silent, violet implosion consumed the top of the mountain. There was no explosion, just a brief, perfect sphere of nothing that collapsed in on itself, taking the null generator with it. One down. Simultaneously, 4 other strike teams across the globe reported success. The decapitation strike had worked. Cinder stood in the transport, watching the mountain recede, a deep sense of satisfaction warming her. She had done it. She had proven that her way, the direct, powerful way, was the right way. She couldn't wait to see the look on Saraphina's face when she told Ash they had won. Thousands of miles away, Saraphina sat in a state of deep meditation. Her physical body was in the war room in Galar, hovering in the center of the room, a silent, glowing statue. But her mind was everywhere. She was the central hub of a new, global consciousness, the Guardian Core. Her psychic senses were woven into a tapestry of minds. She felt the steadfast resolve of Sabrina holding a psychic barrier over a panicked Saffron city. She felt the focused foresight of Olympia protecting the Unistar City sundial, its temporal energies a prime target for Silus. She felt the raw power of Caitlin, the Unova Elite Four member, projecting a wave of calming dreams over a children's hospital in Castelia City where nightmares had begun to take physical form. They were a wall of hope, and Saraphina was its keystone. She directed their efforts, reinforced their barriers, and filtered the psychic static of global fear so they could focus. It was the most exhausting and exhilarating thing she had ever done. She was not just a guardian of a single shrine, she was a guardian of the world's heart. Reports from the Alola archipelago, Saraphina, Olympia's voice echoed in the psychic space. A null manifestation is attempting to sever the bond between the people of the islands and the Tapu. We are losing ground. I am sending you a memory of my own, Saraphina projected back, her voice a soothing balm. The memory of a sun-drenched beach, of the feeling of true belonging. Use it. Project it. Remind the people, and the Tapu, of what they fight for. Let that connection be your weapon. She felt the shift as Olympia's psychic energy changed, taking on the warm, golden hue of Alolan sunshine. The encroaching null faltered. Saraphina allowed herself a flicker of satisfaction. Cinder could break machines. She was saving souls. It was then that she felt it. A new presence in the psychic space. It was not the widespread, chaotic noise of the null. It was a single, sharp, impossibly cold point of intelligence. Silus. He wasn't attacking her network. He was observing it. A remarkable construct, little empath, his mental voice was a sliver of ice in her mind. You have woven the emotional dependencies of your world into a shield. How beautifully, poetically futile. Your machines are broken, Silus, Saraphina projected back, her own voice a wall of cold fury. Your network is crippled. You have lost. A feeling of dry, academic amusement was his only reply. Lost? Did you truly believe those generators were my primary weapon? They were a diagnostic tool. A distraction. A way to confirm my hypothesis about your monarch's predictable, heroic sentimentality. And a way to ensure his most powerful pieces were conveniently off the board. A cold dread, colder than any crown tundra winter, flooded Saraphina. Off the board? Cinder was leading the raids. She, Saraphina, was anchored here, holding the psychic line. Which left Ash. Oh, yes, Silas's voice purred with the pleasure of a successful experiment. I am a researcher, after all. To truly understand a system, one must apply pressure to its most critical component. I wanted to see what happens to your web of hope when you cut its heart out. The world of psychic energy dissolved around her. Saraphina's eyes snapped open. She was back in the war room, the holographic map glittering before her. But the map was wrong. It showed Cinder's team returning from a successful raid. It showed her own Guardian Corps holding the line across the planet. It showed Ash's location as secure, right here in the Galar Battle Tower. But the Battle Tower was no longer a secure location. The attack came without warning. No alarms. No explosions. The very air in the war room seemed to congeal. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into a sudden, oppressive darkness, broken only by the faint glow of the emergency power on the holotable. A figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Silus. Not a projection. Not a possessed acolyte. The man himself, his lab coat pristine, his expression one of calm, dispassionate focus. Pikachu. Ash reacted instantly, leaping back. Pikachu launched himself from Ash's shoulder, a blur of yellow fury. Thunderbolt. Ash commanded. A massive bolt of lightning erupted from Pikachu, powerful enough to short out a power plant. It screamed across the room and slammed into Silus. And did absolutely nothing. The lightning washed over him, dissipating into the air. Silus hadn't even flinched. He wore a faint, shimmering field of distorted space that seemed to simply unmake the energy of the attack. Crude energy is so easy to deconstruct, Silus said, his voice quiet in the darkened room. He took a step forward. But I am not here for you, Monarch. You are merely the control group. His gaze shifted to Saraphina. No. Saraphina screamed, both telepathically and out loud, a strangled cry tearing from her throat. She launched herself forward, a corona of brilliant cerulean energy flaring around her. She didn't bother with psychic attacks. She threw herself physically in front of Ash, her arms spread wide, her body a living shield. Silus smiled, a cold, thin expression of triumph. Precisely the reaction I predicted. From the sleeve of his lab coat, he produced not a weapon, but a small, intricate device of dark metal and spiraling wire, humming with a sickly violet light. It looked like a broken compass. I cannot erase a bond as strong as yours with brute force, Silus explained, his voice taking on the tone of a lecturer. It is too real. But reality, like any system, has rules. And rules have loopholes. To erase a bond, you don't attack the bond itself. You erase the capacity for it to exist. He pointed the device at Saraphina. Ash saw the danger a split second too late. He moved to shove her out of the way, but she was resolute, a statue of defiance protecting him. The device flared. It didn't fire a beam or a projectile. It released a wave of something far worse. A wave of pure, conceptual negation. It wasn't aimed at her body, but at her soul. When the wave hit her, Saraphina didn't scream. She didn't recoil. She simply stopped. The brilliant, cerulean light of her psychic power vanished, snuffed out like a candle flame. The deep, empathetic intelligence in her eyes went blank. The telepathic presence that had been a constant companion in Ash's mind for weeks, the voice like a silver bell, fell silent. Utterly and completely silent. She remained standing, a beautiful, perfect, porcelain doll. But the person inside was gone. Ash stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Saraphina. She didn't respond. Her head tilted slightly, her once expressive face now a perfect, beautiful mask of utter vacancy. He reached out and touched her arm. It was warm, but there was no response. No flicker of recognition. No psychic touch. Nothing. He looked into her eyes, the same stunning cerulean blue, but now they were just eyes. Windows to an empty room. The horror of it crashed over him, a physical blow that drove the air from his lungs. Silus hadn't killed her. He hadn't hurt her. He had hollowed her out. He had taken the brilliant, compassionate, loving soul of the being before him and simply deleted it, leaving the body behind like an abandoned shell. A rage, cold and black and absolute, began to build in Ash's chest. It was a fury unlike any he had ever known. It surpassed the anger he'd felt at poachers, at team leaders, at anyone who had ever threatened his friends. This was a violation on a cosmic scale. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a nascent, terrifying power. The air around him began to crackle, not with electricity, but with the raw, untamed force of his own aura, blazing to life in its most primal form. Silus looked from the empty shell of Saraphina to the incandescent rage of Ash, and he nodded, a scholar confirming a result. Fascinating. The severing of a primary emotional bond results in a significant, uncontrolled amplification of the subject's auric output. The system seeks to fill the void. Wonderful. He turned to leave, his work completed. "Thank you for your participation in this experiment." "You're not going anywhere," Ash growled. He took a step forward, and the floor beneath his feet cracked under the sheer pressure of his aura. But at that moment, the doors to the war room were blown off their hinges. Cinder stood there, her face flushed with victory from her successful raid. "Ash, we did it. The generators are gone." Her triumphant declaration died in her throat as she took in the scene. The darkened room. Silus, calm and unbothered. Ash, radiating a terrifying, murderous energy she had never seen before. And Saraphina, standing perfectly still, her eyes empty, a beautiful statue where a person used to be. Cinder's world tilted on its axis. Her victory, her rivalry, the entire strategic game she had been playing, it all dissolved into meaningless dust. She saw the vacant look in Saraphina's eyes, and she understood. She saw the cold, black fury on Ash's face, and she knew a line had been crossed from which there was no return. The competition was over. The game had been rendered null and void. All that was left was the horrifying aftermath. Silus gave Cinder a cursory glance. "Ah, the brawler returns. A bit late to the proceedings." With a final, dismissive nod, he stepped back into the shadows from which he came and simply vanished. He hadn't escaped. He had just ceased to be there. Cinder rushed into the room, her heart pounding. She looked from Ash to Saraphina and back again. "Ash, what happened? What did he do to her?" Ash didn't answer. He slowly, gently, reached out and cradled Saraphina's blank face in his hands. He looked into her empty eyes, searching for a spark, a flicker, anything. There was nothing. She was gone. The weight of that loss finally broke through his rage, and a single, desperate tear traced a path down his cheek. Cinder stared at the scene, her own triumph turning to ash in her mouth. She had won her part of the battle. She had proven her strength. And in doing so, she had left Ash vulnerable. Her rival, the elegant, annoying, untouchable psychic who had competed with her for Ash's attention, had been violated in the worst way imaginable. And the man they had both fought to win over was now broken before her. Her fists clenched, not in rivalry, but in a furious, protective loyalty. The smug satisfaction was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer a competition. It was a vendetta. Ash finally lowered his hands, a terrifying coldness settling over his features. He gently took Saraphina's hand, his thumb stroking the back of it, as if he could warm it back to life. He looked at Cinder, and the rage in his eyes had been forged into something harder and sharper than any diamond. He didn't beat her, Ash said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. He cheated. He looked down at the catatonic Gardevoir, his partner, his friend, the one who had declared herself the guardian of his heart. And Cinder stepped up, no longer his rival, but his rock. She stood beside him, a silent, powerful presence, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her gaze was fixed on the empty space where Silus had vanished, her ember eyes burning with a promise of absolute retribution. The wife competition was over. It had ended in the most brutal way imaginable. Now, a hunt was beginning. And Cinder would not rest until she had dragged Silus from the void and made him pay for what he had done. Chapter 7, The Unlikely Alliance. The silence in the war room was a living entity. It had been 3 days since the attack. 3 days since Saraphina had become a hollow shell, a beautiful, silent ghost haunting the edge of Ash's vision. She stood where she was left, by the holographic table, her vacant cerulean eyes staring at nothing. Her physical needs were attended to by a worried nurse Joy, but her spirit, her mind, her very self, remained absent without leave. The global victory against Silus's network had turned to ash in the mouths of the world's leaders. They had won the battle, but their enemy had landed a devastating, personal blow against the monarch himself. Fear, once held at bay by Ash's decisive strategy, began to creep back in. If the Null could do that to a being as powerful as Saraphina, what chance did anyone else have? Ash had not slept. He sat in a chair beside Saraphina, holding her cool, unresponsive hand, his own energy a low, dangerous burn. The explosive rage had cooled, forged by grief into a diamond-hard resolve that was terrifying to behold. He was no longer the accessible, warm leader. He was the monarch, a king whose queen had been stolen, and there was a chilling stillness about him that unnerved even his oldest allies. Cinder was his shadow. The fiery, competitive arrogance was gone, replaced by a grim, focused loyalty. She did not try to comfort him with words. That was not her way. Instead, she became his shield, his enforcer. She managed the frantic communications from the other champions, her responses blunt and to the point. She vetted every person who entered the room, her ember eyes promising swift and brutal consequences for anyone who caused Ash more pain. She ate her meals standing by the door, a tireless sentinel. She had lost the competition, but in doing so, had found a deeper purpose, to be the unbreakable wall around Ash's crumbling world. Pikachu was a small, miserable ball of yellow fur, curled up in Seraphina's unmoving lap. He would occasionally look up at her, a hopeful Pika on his lips, only to be met with the same profound emptiness. Then he would rest his head back on her legs, a tiny, furry anchor in a sea of despair. On the third day, Ash finally moved. He stood up, his joints cracking in protest. He looked at Cinder, and the cold fire in his eyes made her straighten up from her post. Conventional methods are useless, Ash said, his voice rough from disuse. Her soul wasn't destroyed. It was, unlinked. Displaced. We can't heal her. We have to find her and bring her back. How? Cinder asked, her voice low. Where do you even start looking for something that's been erased? You don't look for the thing that's gone, Ash replied, his mind, even in its grief, working with a chilling clarity. You look for its opposite. The null is entropy. Annihilation. The void. To counter it, we need a power of creation. Of reality bending. A force that can write new rules. His eyes drifted to the holographic map, which was still active. He zoomed in, past Kanto, past Johto, past even Sinnoh, to a place that wasn't truly a place. A distortion in the data. Giratina, Ash said. Cinder's eyes widened. The renegade Pokémon. The lord of the distortion world, a realm where the laws of time and space were meaningless. An entity of antimatter, the conceptual opposite of nothingness. You want to go to the distortion world? Cinder said, a flicker of her old audacity returning. Ask a reality-eating dragon for help. That's not a plan, Ash. That's a death wish. It's the only plan we have, Ash stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Giratina's realm is made of the very stuff that could counteract the null. It might be the only place her soul could have been displaced to. And it's the only being that would understand what was taken. He looked at the unmoving form of Saraphina. I'm going. With or without help. Cinder looked at his face, at the desperate, unbreakable resolve etched there. She looked at the empty shell of her former rival. She had spent weeks trying to prove she was better than Saraphina. Now, she realized the only way to do that was to save her. You're not going alone, she said, her voice a low growl of determination. But walking into the distortion world is suicide. We need a guide. Someone who knows the terrain. A heavy silence fell as they both considered the terrifyingly small number of people who had been to the distortion world and returned. Most were dead, insane, or in hiding. There's one, Cinder said finally, her voice laced with distaste. He was obsessed with it. Wrote papers on it before the League stripped him of his professorship for unethical research. Ash knew who she meant. A name from the past. A brilliant, disgraced mind who had once tried to harness Giratina's power for himself. Zero, Ash breathed. Finding Zero was not easy. After his defeat years ago, he had vanished, becoming a ghost in the Global League network. But Cinder, given access to the Monarch's intelligence resources and driven by her new, singular purpose, was relentless. She tore through encrypted files and old case reports with a furious efficiency. Within hours, she found him. He was living under an assumed name, running a small, dusty antique bookshop in the back alleys of Hearthome City, right under the nose of the Sinnoh League. They didn't send a strike team. Ash, Cinder, and Pikachu went alone. They left Saraphina in the care of Nurse Joy and Cynthia, who had flown to Galar personally, her face a mask of grim concern. The bookshop was cramped, smelling of decaying paper and regret. A small bell tinkled as they entered. From behind a mountain of books, a man emerged. He was older, his hair shot with gray, his face gaunt, but the manic, intelligent light in his eyes was unmistakable. It was Zero. He froze when he saw Ash. Recognition, fear, and a flicker of old animosity flashed across his face. Catch him, he breathed, his hand instinctively going to a scar hidden beneath his collar. Zero, Ash replied, his voice flat. Zero's eyes flicked to Cinder, who stood by the door, her arms crossed, radiating an aura of barely contained violence. I see you've upgraded your companions. What do you want? If it's an autograph, I'm afraid I'm all out. We need your help, Ash said, cutting straight to the point. We need to get into the distortion world. Zero laughed, a harsh, grating sound. The distortion world? You. After you and your friends ruined my research, thwarted my ambitions, and left me to rot in this, literary mausoleum? You have a talent for irony, Ketchum. The answer is no. Get out. Cinder took a threatening step forward, but Ash held up a hand. He knew aggression wouldn't work here. Zero wasn't a man who could be intimidated by force. He had to be persuaded. One of my Pokémon has been attacked, Ash said, the words catching in his throat. By a man named Silus. He uses a power called the Null. It erases things. Concepts. He used it on her, and now she's empty. Zero's arrogant smirk faltered. His eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of genuine, academic interest. The Null. A conceptual weapon capable of targeted ontological erasure. That's, theoretically fascinating. Impossible, but fascinating. It's very real, Ash said, his voice dangerously quiet. I believe her soul, her consciousness, might have been shunted into a space that could contain it. A place outside of normal reality. A place like the distortion world. I need to find her. And you are the only person on this planet who knows how to navigate it. Zero was silent for a long moment, his brilliant, unstable mind processing the information. The science of it, the sheer audacity of it, was pulling him in. But the old bitterness remained. And why should I help you, he sneered. So you can have your happy ending. The world is full of suffering, Ketchum. Your pet is just one more casualty. Ash's control snapped. In a flash, he crossed the small shop and slammed his hand on the counter next to Zero's head, his face inches from the disgraced scientists. The books on the shelves rattled from the force of his aura alone. Because this isn't just about my Pokémon. Ash snarled, the cold fury returning to his voice. Silus wants to erase everything. Every book in this shop. Every memory you have. Every law of physics you ever studied. He wants to turn the entire universe into a silent, dead nothing. Your ambition was to control a world. His is to delete it. You wanted to be a god. He wants to kill God. So you can sit here and rot in your bitterness, or you can help me stop the one man in the universe whose insanity makes yours look like a child's tantrum. Zero stared into Ash's blazing eyes. He saw not a plea for help, but a furious, undeniable truth. Silus was not a rival. He was an endpoint. The ultimate negation of all ambition, all knowledge, all existence. Helping Ash wasn't about redemption. It was about survival. A slow, manic grin spread across Zero's face. A conceptual weapon, an anti-deity. Ketchum, you've finally found a problem that's interesting enough for my talents. Very well. I'll be your guide. But not for free. Name your price, Ash said. Full reinstatement. My professorship back. Unrestricted access to all League research on dimensional physics, Zero listed, his eyes gleaming. I want to study the null. I want samples. I want data on this Silus. You are fighting the heat death of the universe made manifest, and I want a front row seat. Fine, Ash agreed without hesitation. It was a deal with the devil, but he would have bartered his own soul to save Saraphina. The journey to the distortion world began at the ruins of the spear pillar. Zero, using a combination of his old technology and stolen Devon Corp schematics, jury-rigged a dimensional gateway. It was unstable, dangerous, and our only way in. The null energy from Silus's attack has left a sympathetic resonance on your soul, Ketchum, Zero explained as he calibrated the device. It's like a scar. Giratina will sense it. It will be drawn to you. Aggressively. Our only chance is to move fast. Just get us in, Cinder said, her arms crossed, her distrust of Zero palpable. I'll do more than that, Zero said with a smug grin. I'll help you fight. He gestured to Cinder. Your pure physical style is effective, but brute force is diffused in a world with no physical laws. You need an anchor. He tossed her a pair of heavy, metallic bracers. Graviton regulators. Calibrated to your biosigns. They will artificially create a localized field of stable physics around you. In the distortion world, you won't just be a brawler. You'll be a walking law of nature. You'll be the only thing that hits with predictable force. Cinder looked at the bracers, then at Zero, a flicker of grudging respect in her eyes. The madman was useful. The gateway roared to life, a swirling vortex of sickening colors and screaming sound. Ready, Ketchum. Zero yelled over the din, time to hunt a ghost in a world of ghosts. Ash gave a grim nod, Pikachu tense on his shoulder. He took one last look at the blue sky of his own world, then stepped into the abyss. The distortion world was a nauseating, beautiful hell. They stood on a floating shard of rock, drifting through a sea of purple clouds and inverted waterfalls. Shards of broken landscapes, a forest here, a city block there, floated past like debris in an ocean. There was no up or down, no real sense of distance. Saraphina. Ash projected with his mind, a desperate, hopeful call into the chaotic void. Can you hear me? The only answer was a deep, guttural roar that shook the very fabric of the dimension. From the purple mists below, a colossal form rose. Giratina. Its serpentine body coiled through the impossible space, its 6 shadowy wings beating against the non-air. Its red eyes, burning with ancient rage, fixed on Ash. It had sensed the scar of the null. It saw him as an infection. A trespasser. It seems your quarry has found you. Zero shouted with manic glee, already tapping away at a handheld scanner. Incredible. The energy readings are off the charts. Giratina opened its maw and unleashed a blast of pure, shadow-laced energy. Cinder, now. Ash yelled. Cinder didn't need to be told. She activated the bracers. A faint, shimmering field enveloped her. She leaped from their floating rock platform onto another, smaller one, her movements suddenly sharp, precise, and governed by a physics that didn't belong here. She was an island of stability in a sea of chaos. The shadow force blast hit the rock where they had been standing, shattering it into a million pieces. Ash, Pikachu, and Zero were sent tumbling through the void. Ash used his own aura to create a small anchor point, grabbing Zero's coat. Pikachu fired an electroweb, creating a makeshift net that caught onto a passing shard of floating crystal. "This isn't a fight we can win," Ash yelled, his voice strained. "We just need to find her." He closed his eyes, ignoring the rampaging legendary Pokémon, and focused. He pushed his senses out, not looking for Saraphina's presence, but for her absence. The same way he felt the dead zones. He searched for a pocket of absolute stillness in this world of endless motion. A point of perfect, hollowed-out peace. There. He felt it. A tiny, fragile island of calm in the distance. A place where the chaotic energy of the distortion world did not touch. "That way," he shouted, pointing. Cinder heard him. She became their vanguard. While Giratina raged, she became a living battering ram, a force of nature against a god. She couldn't hurt the colossal Pokémon, but with her gravity-anchored movements, she could deflect its attention. She leaped from rock to rock, a blur of cream and brown, drawing its fire. A kick, empowered by the graviton field, struck a passing rock shard and sent it careening into Giratina's side. It was like throwing a pebble at a battleship, but it was annoying enough to keep the beast occupied. Ash, Pikachu, and Zero followed in her wake, leaping across the treacherous, floating debris. It was a desperate, high-speed chase, a flight and a rescue all at once. Finally, they saw it. A small, crystalline island, perfectly symmetrical, floating in a pocket of absolute silence. And on it, a shimmering, translucent figure was curled up, glowing with a faint, heartbreakingly familiar cerulean light. It was Saraphina's soul. "I'll keep the big guy busy," Cinder yelled, landing on a large platform between them and the rampaging Giratina. She stomped her foot, and the graviton field flared, making the platform unnaturally dense. "Go." Ash didn't hesitate. He, Pikachu, and Zero landed on the crystalline island. The moment he stepped onto it, he felt a wave of profound peace and sadness wash over him. "Incredible," Zero whispered, his scanner whirring. The null didn't just displace her soul. It encased it in a pocket of perfected entropy. A cage made of pure tranquility. To re-enter her body, she would have to choose to leave, but in here, there is no pain. No struggle. No reason to leave. It's the perfect prison. Ash walked towards the shimmering form. He could see her now, her ethereal body trembling slightly. She was safe. She was at peace. And she was lost. He knelt before her. "Saraphina. It's me. It's Ash." Her form flickered, but did not respond. "We came for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Cinder, she's fighting a god for you right now." At the mention of Cinder's name, her form trembled more violently. A single, telepathic word, faint and fragile as a dying star, brushed against his mind. "Why?" "Because we're partners," Ash said, tears welling in his eyes. "All of us. Because the world is a mess, and it's painful, and it's a struggle. But it's our mess. And it's not the same without you. I'm not the same without you. I need my shield. I need my counsel. I need my friend." He reached out, not with his hand, but with his soul. He poured his own energy, his own memories, into the space around her. Not the memories of battles or victories, but the small moments. The quiet look of understanding they shared in the Whisperwood. The feeling of her psychic presence as a comforting hum in his mind. The way she moved, the way she fought, the way she was. From behind him, he felt another energy signature join his. Cinder, having taken a brutal hit from Giratina's tail that had sent her flying across the void, had landed on the island. Her graviton bracers were sparking, one of them cracked. She was bleeding from a cut on her arm. But she was standing. She walked up beside Ash, and she too reached out. She didn't have memories of quiet moments. She poured her own essence into the offering, the memory of their clash in the ashen caldera. The grudging respect she felt when Saraphina's shield held. The shared terror in the frigid sanctum. The fury and protective loyalty that drove her here. She offered her rivalry, her strength, her anger, her respect. All of it. A raw, honest, and completely Cinder-like tribute. The two offerings, Ash's warm, steady light and Cinder's fiery, passionate blaze, enveloped the shimmering soul. They weren't commanding it. They were inviting it. Reminding it. Come back. We're not complete without you. The soul of Saraphina uncurled. It looked at the two energies, at the two beings offering their very essence to bring her home. It saw the bond between them, a bond forged in fire and grief, a bond that now had a space waiting for her. She saw the pain of existence. And she saw the love that made it worth enduring. With a final, silent pulse of light, her soul surged forward, flowing into Ash. Not to possess him, but to use him as a conduit, a bridge back to the world of the living. In that moment, Giratina, sensing the sudden shift, let out a final, frustrated roar and dove back into the purple mists, its rage abated as the scar of the null was subsumed by this new, powerful connection. It's time to go, Zero said, his eyes wide with wonder. The gateway won't hold for much longer. Ash, with Saraphina's soul safe within him, nodded. Cinder, battered but triumphant, helped him to his feet. Together, the four of them leaped from the island and ran for the swirling vortex of the gateway, leaving the chaos of the distortion world behind them. They had gone into the abyss and faced a god, not to win a battle, but to reclaim a soul. Chapter 8, The Heart of the Void. The return to the Galar battle tower was a blur of dimensional turbulence and adrenaline. They burst from the shimmering gateway back into the war room, the portal collapsing behind them with a deafening implosion that cracked the floor. The air of the real world, stable and blessedly boring, was the sweetest thing Cinder had ever tasted. Cynthia was there, her Garchomp at her side, her usual composure replaced by an expression of profound relief. Nurse Joy rushed forward with a medical kit, but Cinder waved her off, her eyes fixed on Ash. Ash stumbled, a hand pressed to his chest. He felt Saraphina's soul within him, a warm, bright spark of light that was both familiar and overwhelmingly powerful. It was not a possession, it was a symbiosis. He could feel her joy at being free, her gratitude, her exhaustion, and a deep, resonant love that was now inextricably linked with his own essence. Ash! Cynthia exclaimed, moving to steady him. I'm all right, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. She's with me. We need to get her back. He walked over to the silent, motionless form of Saraphina. She stood as they had left her, a perfect, empty vessel. He knelt before her, Cinder taking up a protective stance beside him, her battered body a testament to the battle she had fought. Zero hovered in the background, his scanners whirring, his face alight with the thrill of witnessing a miracle of ontological science. This is the delicate part, Zero murmured, more to himself than anyone. Reintegrating a consciousness with its physical form after a conceptual displacement, the potential for psychic fragmentation is immense. Ash ignored him. He placed his hands on Saraphina's shoulders. Cinder, understanding what was needed without a word, placed her own hands over his. They were the two anchors, the two halves of the bridge. Come home, Saraphina, Ash whispered. He pushed, releasing her soul from within him. A ball of brilliant cerulean light flowed from his chest, along his arms, and into Saraphina. Cinder, in turn, poured her own energy into the process, not her life force, but the grounding, physical reality of her being, the anchor she had become. She was the lightning rod, ensuring the soul returned to its proper vessel and didn't simply dissipate into the world. For a moment, nothing happened. The light was absorbed into Saraphina's form, and the silence returned. Ash's heart plummeted. Then, she blinked. Her head lifted, and her cerulean eyes, no longer vacant, swept the room. They were filled with a dawning awareness, a flood of returning life. She looked at Cinder's battered form, at Ash's worried face, at Pikachu, who was tentatively pawing at her leg. Her gaze met Cinder's. The rivalry, the animosity, the competition, it was all gone. In its place was a look of profound, silent gratitude. A telepathic touch, softer than a whisper, brushed against Cinder's mind. "Thank you, my fierce sister." Cinder, for the first time in her life, was at a loss for words. She just gave a short, awkward nod, a faint blush creeping up her neck. Then, Saraphina's eyes found Ash's. The silver bell of her voice rang in his mind, clearer and more resonant than ever before. "I am here, Ash." But it was different now. The connection was deeper. Through their shared ordeal, a permanent link had been forged. He could not only hear her voice, but feel her emotions as if they were his own. He felt her boundless relief, her unwavering loyalty, and a love so pure and powerful it made his knees weak. And then, through her, he felt something else. A new connection, one that hadn't been there before. He could feel Cinder. Her fiery spirit, her stubborn pride, her bedrock loyalty. He could feel it through Saraphina, a trilateral bond woven in the crucible of the distortion world. Saraphina had awakened, not just restored, but changed. She was no longer just a psychic empath. She was a psychic nexus, a living bridge between the three of them. She could feel Cinder's fiery passion, and Cinder, to her immense surprise, could feel a faint echo of Saraphina's psychic grace, a newfound sense of calm beneath her usual storm. The moment of reunion was shattered by a global alert that blared from the hollow table, a screeching klaxon that signaled a threat level beyond anything they had ever seen. On the map, a single, massive dead zone erupted, centered over the ruins of the spear pillar in Sinnoh, the very place they had just left. It was not a creeping red blotch. It was a maelstrom of black, corrosive energy, expanding at an impossible rate. Silus's voice, no longer calm and academic, but roaring with the force of a cosmic storm, echoed from every speaker in the room. The data is complete. The hypothesis is proven. Existence is flawed. It clings. It fights. It rebuilds. It is a cancer that must be excised. He used us, Zero breathed, his face pale with horror and awe. Our trip to the distortion world, the energy signature of the gateway, he used it as a targeting beacon. To open a permanent, massive rift for the null to enter our world. He's not opening a gateway, Ash said, his eyes fixed on the black storm on the map, a dawning, terrible understanding on his face. He is the gateway. On the screen, live satellite footage from Spear Pillar resolved through the static. It showed Silus, standing at the center of the ruins, his arms outstretched. His body was dissolving, not into nothing, but into a shimmering portal of pure blackness. He was sacrificing himself, his own physical form, the final component needed to tear a hole in reality. The great stillness is at hand, his voice boomed, distorting as his humanity dissolved. Behold, the final, perfect answer. From the black hole that was once Silus, a form began to emerge. It was colossal, a titan of impossible geometry and chilling presence. It was the form of Regigigas, the creator titan they had freed from the frigid sanctum. But it had been hollowed out, its creative essence replaced by the absolute zero of the null. Its body was no longer rock and moss, but a shifting mass of black anti-stars and silent, screaming voids. Where its eyes should have been were two miniature black holes. It was no longer a creator. It was the corrupted, the unmaker. It raised a hand, and a wave of pure null energy washed over the Sinnoh region. On the map, a dozen towns and cities simply vanished. Not destroyed. Erased from the map as if they had never been. This was it. The final move. The world-ending threat. All champions, all Elite Four, all assets. Ash's voice rang out, the monarch's authority absolute and unshakable. Converge on Spear Pillar. This is not a containment action. This is a war for existence itself. Delay it. Distract it. Buy us time. The orders were given. He didn't wait for a reply. He looked at his partners. At Pikachu, crackling with righteous fury. At Cinder, her battered body already thrumming with the need to fight. At Saraphina, her face serene but her eyes burning with a holy light. The three of them were a single, cohesive unit. The rivalry was a distant memory. The love triangle had resolved into an unbreakable trinity. Let's go, Ash said. We're ending this. Their arrival at Spear Pillar was like descending into hell. The sky was a swirling vortex of black energy. The very ground felt unreal, shifting and uncertain. A global army of trainers and their Pokémon were locked in a desperate battle against the corrupted Regigigas. Lance's Dragonite unleashed a hyper beam that was simply swallowed by the void of the Titan's body. Cynthia's Garchomp launched a Dragon Rush, only to be swatted aside by a hand that moved with the terrifying finality of a closing book. The Titan was not just powerful, it was conceptually unbeatable. It didn't destroy attacks, it unmade them. It didn't take damage, it erased the concept of the damage having ever occurred. Ash, Saraphina, and Cinder landed on a shattered pillar, surveying the hopeless battle. We can't fight it, Cinder said, her voice grim. Nothing we hit will matter. She is right, Saraphina's voice echoed in both their minds. Its very existence is an anti-existence. Physical force is meaningless. Then we don't fight its body, Ash said, his gaze locked on the very center of the Titan's chest, where a faint, sickly purple light pulsed, the last remnant of Silus's consciousness, the heart of the gateway. We fight its heart. We fight the idea. How do you punch an idea? Cinder asked, frustrated. You don't, Ash replied, a strange calm settling over him. He looked at his two partners, and he smiled. A true, genuine smile. You outshine it. He turned to the other champions. Everyone. Fall back. Give us a clear field. Confused but trusting the monarch's command, the battered forces of the world pulled back, leaving the corrupted Titan alone on the battlefield with the three of them. It wins by erasing bonds, by proving that everything ends in nothing, Ash said, his voice ringing with conviction. We'll show it something that can't be erased. Something that isn't nothing. He held out his hands. Saraphina took one, Cinder the other. Pikachu leaped onto his shoulder, a small, brilliant spark of defiance. Ready? Ash asked. They both nodded. He closed his eyes and reached inward, to the core of his being, to the unshakable belief that had carried him through 100 impossible battles, his belief in the power of connection. He poured all of it out, a blazing torrent of pure, unadulterated aura. Saraphina, her eyes glowing, became the lens. She took Ash's raw power and wove it together with her own profound empathy, her understanding of love, hope, and sacrifice. She shaped his raw energy into a symphony of everything the null was not, a testament to life, to struggle, to joy. Cinder became the amplifier. She poured her own essence into the mix, her fire, her passion, her unbreakable will to exist, her fierce, protective loyalty. She gave their metaphysical weapon a physical, undeniable weight. She was the proof that life was not a fragile idea, but a stubborn, brawling, beautiful reality that refused to die. The three of them became a beacon. A sun of pure, concentrated existence blazing in the face of the void. Their combined energy, Ash's belief, Seraphina's love, Cinder's life, was anathema to the corrupted. The Titan turned its full attention on them. It raised its hand to unleash a wave of absolute erasure. But it was too late. The beacon of light that was Ash, Saraphina, and Cinder did not fire a beam. It simply expanded. It was a wave of pure, undeniable reality. A declaration. We are here. We are connected. We matter. The wave of existence washed over the corrupted Titan. There was no explosion. No scream. Only a profound, resonant silence. The black, anti-star matter of its body could not exist in the face of such overwhelming, life-affirming energy. It dissolved, not into nothingness, but back into the potential from which it came. The sickly purple light of Silus's consciousness flickered, and then, with a final, faint sigh of what might have been relief, it was gone. The Unmaker was unmade. The black vortex in the sky vanished. The sun broke through the clouds. The ground solidified. The oppressive silence was replaced by the sound of the wind, the distant cry of a staraptor, the collective, disbelieving gasp of 1,000 trainers. It was over. The sun was setting over Pallet Town, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The world was healing. The dead zones were receding, life slowly returning to the places that had been erased. The story of the monarch and his two extraordinary partners had already become legend. Ash sat on the soft grass of the hill behind his house, the same hill where he had watched so many sunsets. He wasn't the monarch here. He was just Ash. A gentle weight settled on his left shoulder as Saraphina rested her head there, her psychic presence a warm, comforting blanket around him. A moment later, a more solid, equally comforting weight settled on his right shoulder as Cinder leaned against him, her fiery energy banked into a peaceful glow. Pikachu was curled up in his lap, fast asleep, twitching as he dreamed of ketchup and victory. There had been no final choice. No grand declaration. There didn't need to be. The question of who would be his main wife had been answered not with a decision, but with a new definition of family. The sky is beautiful tonight, Saraphina's voice hummed in his mind, and Cinder felt the sentiment echo in her own heart through their new bond. Yeah, Cinder said aloud, her voice soft. Not bad. Ash looked from one to the other. At the elegant psychic who was his wisdom and his heart. At the fierce brawler who was his strength and his fire. He had not chosen one over the other. He had chosen both. And in doing so, they had become something more. Not a trainer and his Pokémon. Not a man and his two suitors. They were a family. Forged in the heart of the void, bound by a love that had stared down oblivion and refused to blink. They were a single, tripartite soul, ready for whatever new dawn the world had in store for them. Ash wrapped his arms around them both, pulling them closer. Together, they watched the last sliver of the sun dip below the horizon. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.